Call this meeting to order at 12 p.m. We are in the Joe N. Untitled Junior Teacher Education Center. Today is August the 13th, 2019. And this is one of our typical, the first Tuesdays or the second Tuesdays of the month is typically board discussion session. But we still had a lot to review for the budget, so Dr. Moxley and staff will be reviewing the strategic plan, and we'll dive into the budget discussion. So at this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dr. Moxley.
Good morning, board members. Thank you. I guess it's afternoon now, so thank you very much for being here this afternoon and letting us have some time to finish up the discussion on the strategic plan. We have Brian McMahon and Chris Taylor with us, and they have been working a lot to get the data together. You do have a PowerPoint slide presentation. This is a continuation from our previous board meeting and workshop on this item. As you'll recall, we did get through the student achievement or student success topic, and we want to continue with that. We did want to provide some updates as some follow-up questions have come. So we're going to start on slide 8. If you would like to go to that particular slide, the previous slides were ones we've already talked about. As always, if there's something you would like to go back and discuss, we can certainly do that. But today, we're going to provide some clarification on some of this academic test data, and then we're going to move into the other categories of the strategic plan. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian McMahon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So this slide 8 was inserted from the previous PowerPoint, so if you do have a printed copy from the last board workshop, this slide is not in there. We added it to kind of enlighten just from the previous discussion as well as some subsequent emails and conversations. A question as simple as how many students do we have enrolled is a very convoluted answer. And I use that as an illustration because the devil's in the details. And one of the things that we have taken back from this is that we want to make sure that we define our data very explicitly to you guys and to the public so that they understand exactly what we're looking at. Something as far as how many students are enrolled in the school. It could be full year enrolled, which is what we use for school grades or what the state uses for school grades. Someone who comes in March, the state doesn't want to use that, I hate to say against the school, but they don't want to credit the school or use it against the school because that student wasn't there all year. Likewise, with discipline, though, if someone is with us in August and September and receives some kind of disciplinary action, we want to include that in our discipline. And so in that case, we're going to use all students, regardless of their enrollment. Bring that up because the state assessment results come to us in stages, and it truly is the details of it elicit different meanings. So when they first release it in May, for example, it's a raw data file. If a student took a test at our school, it's going to be reported in that May results. Homeschool students who take an EOC at the schools, they will be in there. And then in July, they release the school grades. Well, that's a very explicit 50 pages of rules of who to include and who not to include. It's a very different set of data. And then just recently, you might have learned that EduData came out. Well, even EduData, because it's federal reporting, has a different set of definitions. Probably the most disparate data would be ELL learners, because the state defines an ELL learner as currently or within that 2 years of monitoring, whereas the federal government through the EduData extends that 2 years to 4 years of data. And when you look at the proficiency rates of ELL learners between EduData and school grades, it's quite a bit different. Yes.
So recently we had someone come and speak at Citizen Input, and they, I think, made some claims as to the fact that they felt that the district wasn't being direct or correct in the reporting of the data for our students. And obviously as board members that would be concerning, right? Because we want to know that the information that we're receiving is correct so we can make good choices for students and families in our community. So am I to understand, would this explain some of the reasoning why someone who may not have all of the details of this type of how the students are counted, why they might see discrepancies in numbers?
It could, and that's why we wanted to provide a brief explanation, because it's released in stages and there are different counts in the denominator and numerator, so the rates are going to be different. And you're right, it's not that we're trying to mislead, this is the data that we have available to
So
us.
my follow-up question, Mrs. Ork, may I, would be, if someone would like to understand how the data comes out in a little bit more detail so that they can make, you know, a better evaluation, and can speak more accurately to the data, how would they go about learning a little bit more about that? I guess that question's for Dr. Moxley.
One of the things that we've talked about is that when we produce a report at whatever stage, we are going to put a footnote there to reference, this is data that came from EdgeStats. This was a data that came from EduData. This is for school grading purposes, so that we can now specifically say, and that will communicate to you as well as the public, to say this is the data set that we're using to produce this report. It can be a simple footnote. Now, the question comes in is that, okay, I want to dive into the data. Well, individual student data, we can't, you know, that's something that we work with the files, and they're Loctite for obvious reasons. So, again, there are some of those safeguards there, but we're going to be very clear where the data set comes from. I think one of the questions that came up from that was around the African American Achievement Plan and the data set, the data charts in there. We have all agreed in our conversations within the district here that any data reporting we do that has to do with FSA data, we will report in the same format. It will be level 1, level 2, 3, and above. It'll be in that format. Now, there may be a specific time where we would want to report level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but we will follow that same. It will go from left to right. It will mirror the district templates with that, so we're very consistent. In that particular example, and I can't speak to why, because that chart was done, months and months and months ago. So where that chart originated from, who decided the format was level 1 and then 3 and above, I can't answer that. And I'm not sure that that's really the issue to be answered. The issue is what moving forward, here's the format we're going to use, and we're going to qualify the data set that data is coming from and referencing.
That's wonderful, and I hope that'll help clear up some of
I
the
hope so.
misunderstanding. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we're actually going to skip ahead a few slides because we've gone over this. I do want to bring to your attention slide 10. At the last meeting, it was asked to parcel out the non-charter data. So I did do that for you, as well as adding the race ethnicity of multiracial to that chart. Okay. So I just wanted to point that out to you. And then we're going to fast forward, and that's also slide 11 with the gains, to slide 16, and that is where we left off from the last meeting. You guys a chance to catch up?
Yep. Let's pause for just a minute because I know they're looking at the updates that you gave.
Any questions on the updates?
Okay.
Yes, I have one. I don't want to interrupt here because we're just discussing data, but just in the back, towards the end, if we can discuss how we're going to set up goals or something, because I know like with our students, the two that are obviously way below are English language learners and students with disabilities. So I know with students with disabilities, we have IEPs, we have goals, I think we need an update on what we're going to do for our ELL population.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, 16.
Slide 16 is our attendance and discipline. With the discipline on the top, we measure two ways: the percent of students with an office discipline referral. Level 3 and above is the level of, that signifies that an administrator at the school is one that is actually engaging with a student. Level 1 and 2 would be a classroom incident report. So these are students who have received a referral, been kind of quote unquote sent to the front office, if you will. And it is a measurement of whether or not they've gotten one or more. So as soon as they've gotten that ODR, they are kind of counted in this percentage. And then the second one is similar to that methodology, but it is one out-of-school suspension. Whether it's for a day or 10 days, we are tracking the percent of students who have gotten one or more of those out-of-school suspensions.
And I think it's, the other point is that you do have the African American Achievement Plan that is also including discipline. It's going to break it down into the subgroup for the desegregation order and the data collected there. I think, and while that plan is driving that, I think it is important, and we will also be looking at it as a breakdown as well.
All right,
Attendance?
attendance, the average daily attendance is it is a strict numeric average of the days that students were present divided by the days the students were enrolled. One of the mathematical shortcomings of a numeric mean or an average is that it is influenced by outliers. And so one of the things when we do track attendance, it is important to look at the average daily attendance rate, but it's also important to look at those outliers. What are those percent of students that are below 90%? Because they can sometimes, you can have an average daily attendance rate that actually is increasing and you think, wow, this is great. But actually what happens is you look at the students who are not coming to school, and they are not coming to school at a larger rate. So it's important when we problem solve that you look at both of those. Where are the students falling, and below 90%, between 90 and 95, and above 95%. Those are our cutoffs. So we have on here two measures. One is the average daily attendance rate, but we also look at what are our percentage of students that are below 90% attendance, and is that rising, is it decreasing? Question?
Actually, it's back a slide. It's slide 15, and it's a simple question. The TBD expectedly July, do you have that? Did you get it?
Yes and no. It's been one issue after another with it.
So you
and
got
I
it, but it
apologize.
needs refinement before you can give it to us.
We are loading it into Focus. There was some issues with loading it into Focus we've had, without getting into the details. It is forthcoming, and we do have the raw data, and we're trying to make it a little bit efficient, and just if it could come up, it's come up. So I apologize.
That's all right. Got it. Thank you.
Mrs. Berenborg, and then.
Yeah, two issues. One, we talked a little bit about this attendance rate and my concern for students that are out so many large numbers a day. So again, Dr. Moxley, are we going to get some sort of report about a plan for those students?
That was one of the items that I think we had on a workshop agenda early in
Got
the
moved
summer
back.
about attendance, and we had to postpone it for some reason, and then the staff was gone. So we will be bringing that around and include a plan on that
Right,
one.
because I see some of them over there, so I was wondering about that. And then the second question was, does this information that we have, this data set, include charters or not? It does. So again, Dr. Moxley, I think we talked about this, is that we could have two sets of data, one with charters, one without, because we do evaluate our superintendent by what they directly can affect, and I think that we need to have that data separated. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My question, I'm going to go to slide 15. You made reference to you all receiving the raw data. For those who are new to this process and who may not understand, can you just clarify the difference,
Sure.
the definition between raw data and any other data?
The first week of July, the College Board and IB produce a student results. The design is to get the students their results as quickly as possible. So what actually comes to us is a PDF, and it's nothing that we could take and import into any kind of data system. So when we try, and it's literally the name, it is not any IDs that we would have. It's College Board's ID or it's IB's international ID. So it's not something we could take and easily import. So about July 22nd, about the third week in July, we get from College Board a raw data file, which, not to get too technical, it's in a format to where we can take and load it into our information system. And so we wait for that, and then it is a process to load the data into Focus, and it's a process to pull that data and to pull in race, ethnicity, ED status, those other factors that we would evaluate the data from.
So some might argue that the data that is posted on the FLDOE website that is not raw data. Some might question, why are we not just pulling that data and using that data? Why are we disaggregating
They don't have
the
AP
raw
or IB.
data? I'm sorry?
DOE does not possess AP and IB data.
Okay.
What they do have is they have an agreement with them for the school grades. So at the high school level, there is a component of acceleration, and in that component, what it measures is a percent of your graduation cohort that has one or more passing scores in AP, IB, dual enrollment, ACE, the AICE, which we don't have in this district, or an industry certification. So the data that we would have is just whether a student had one or not, and there is nothing that we can get the raw data to actually get and calculate how many exams, what is our exact pass rate. The other problem with this is that particular piece of data lags a full year. So even if I went into the school grades now, it will be from the 17-18 school year, because it lags a year, the graduation
Well,
cohort.
I went up and I saw 18-19 on the DOE
AP and
website.
IB data?
Oh, no, not that.
Yeah.
Just their,
This is specific to the AP IB, and that DOE does not provide.
okay. My other question is regarding page 16 on discipline. What about, are schools not involved in school suspension? And if so, what is that data?
They are. It was a decision by Dr. Rendell last year, I believe, to change this measure to out-of-school suspension, to remove the in-school suspension from it at that time.
Why was that decision made, do you know?
I don't.
I would like to see the in-school suspension as well.
I will tell you, moving forward, we have already met that we will be tracking in-school suspension. So that is a data point that we have moving forward that will be on
Awesome.
the report.
That would be fantastic, because we're missing a chunk of information, and I want us to be completely transparent and not have it seem as if we are, fudging the numbers or not being open with all of the discipline that might be out there. So I think that that's going to play a big part in what these numbers look like. Also, I would, on all of these charts, support Mrs. Barenborg's suggestion to separate charter schools on these, so we can actually see the difference between charter school suspension rates or, ODRs, or their out-of-school, in-school suspension versus all of the other data. So that, I
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
And to that point, I think for this, we're trying to close out the 18-19 school year according to the 18-19 strategic plan and how we had done it. I think moving forward, I think Dr. Moxley had mentioned having some kind of direction for next year to get some input.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Also, define in-school suspension. Is that a full year, or is that like one class period that they sit
That
out?
is the challenge, and I think that's probably, if I were guessing, that is why it probably was streamlined the way it is. So that is the challenge, and I am interested in in-school suspension. The challenge that we're facing, and we haven't gone to this level of detail yet, of how are we going to define it, because we've got to be consistent that you're comparing an apple to an apple, and how schools are doing it. So we're kind of in that conversation and finding out what are we currently doing, how are we doing it, how are we defining it, to see how can we have that consistency. Because unless you have the consistency, it's not valid.
Right, I just think we need to kind of separate that, because a student being pulled out of a class for a class period, to me, without them wanting to be, that's a suspension.
Right.
You're suspending them from learning. So I think that we need to track those 1 hour blocks as well that are being pulled.
Dr. McMahon, I wanted to ask you, the 19.1%, that also includes the in-school?
The 19.1% is actually the actual referral without respect to the action the administrator took for that. So if I'm a teacher and I write a referral for a student for breaking the rules, they get sent to the office, that's what that 19.1%. Now, what is done with that, if that student is suspended, if they're just a parent contact, that's not captured in this particular measure.
Okay.
The one right below it is capturing if they have one or more out-of-school suspensions as a result of that referral.
Another interesting note here is I look at our graduation rates, our graduation, it's hard to say. Graduation rates last year was what, 92?
I think that is on slide 12. So
And
92.
then I look at daily attendance rate was 92. So how it really does go hand in hand with attendance and success of the students. I'm very concerned about our high school students who are not attending on a regular basis, and, you know, ensuring that we do all we can to make sure that they get to class, and you know, I don't have the answer right now for that, so I do look forward to that workshop that we're gonna have.
I think the other thing too is that, you know, when I was a school principal at any of the levels, I really looked at students that started to have 5 or more days. And I really looked at it the first 9 weeks, if I saw a student that had 5 days already in the first quarter. So I really looked at percentages along the way. At the semester break, you know, if I had a student that had 5 or more, I still was looking, because to me that's becoming chronic. Really looking at what is that percent for where we are in that part of the year. So it's kind of like a proration, if you will, to start identifying chronic absenteeism before you get to the end of the year and you get this data set.
I'm just going to agree with Mrs. Rourke. Obviously, attendance is a very important thing, and I'm excited to have the workshop. I think that we have staff that's actually doing some wonderful work in parent outreach and attendance, but I think we may find that we need to bolster that department a bit, because I do believe that it is important enough for us to put our money where our mouth is on that one, to use a crass saying, but something that's very true.
Just one last thought, as a parent taking the kids into school and being there even 10, 15 minutes after school starts, and seeing families just kind of meandering into school, and you know, just stressing to make sure that they get there on time. I don't see the tardiness on here, but just making sure that the families understand that it's important for the kids to get in there, sit down at their seat, and start their morning work, and versus just coming in and just being frazzled. That's not a good learning environment either.
I think you're absolutely right, and perhaps I'm hearing an appetite for another discussion about school start time. When we talk about attendance.
No, I'm not talking about that.
But when we talk about attendance and tardy, I think that should play a part in that discussion about attendance and tardy. Dr. Moxley, if we could, when we do the workshop, if we could have the tardy information for the high schools especially, because I know that has been a driving force for school start time change in other districts.
The state requires us to monitor through the early warning system attendance K to 8. And what we find is the intervention piece for attendance at elementary looks very different at middle and high, because at the elementary, the locus of control is with the parents. So you're really addressing the parents, the importance of attendance. But we need to develop the good habits then, because when it comes to middle school and high school and they have more freedom, they express themselves through attendance. But by then, they've got years of attitudes. So. Any other questions before we move on? The next set of data is, again, this is one of the reasons why we wanted to switch to this particular format with a PowerPoint, is that if you were referring back to the spreadsheet, this would appear in several places. And so we wanted to consolidate it just so that you have it in one sheet. These are directly from the student, parent, and staff satisfaction surveys that are given at the end of the year. And this shows you the first 2 columns are the student results, parent results, and then the staff results in the last 2 columns. And it's responding to the question, what grade would you give your school and or district? The staff in the district for 17, 18, 18, 19, that particular question is asked a little differently and is done by department, and that's why we don't have the data for the 18, 19, 17, 18 staff for the district grade.
I just want to make a comment. If you look at this, it's kind of interesting. The students are a little bit more critical than the staff and the parents. I wonder why.
Because they don't have recess all day?
Mrs. Rosario.
I'm sorry, I may have missed it, did you say why we don't have staff for 17, 18, or 18, 19?
For the district, yeah. So the way the survey is written is through the department, so they're giving a grade for the department. It's not an overall grade for the district.
But how is that? If the survey is a general survey and it's asking what grade would you give your school? The question isn't what grade would you give your department?
Because the staff gets a different survey, it's, do you know?
I'm sorry, because
exact- No,
I
it's-
thought I heard you say that
way that
everyone
it's-
has the same question.
Yes and no. Students and parents each survey is different. The way the questions are written for students are going to be written to their
Okay.
understanding level. So the wording is going to be different. I may have misspoke and said this is exactly how all three surveys are
Okay.
worded, but it's essentially what it's getting at is what grade would you give your school and/or district? So when it goes to the staff, it's written for the department, so everyone in the C&I department would respond and give a grade for the C&I department. Everyone in the Human Resources department would give a grade for the Human Resources department. And so it's tough to aggregate that across and assume that that is a grade for the district, where it might just be specifically for the department. It is something we can look at to add that question.
But how did we do it in previous years?
I don't know, I can't speak to that.
Because in previous years, there is a grade here. So,
It could be that that question was different then, or it was sent out differently.
Different
Those aren't
I'm sorry, yes, you're right. I'm looking, I'm getting a little confused here.
Because the staff does it for their school. That's why you see when you go down the chart.
So are we going to have this column empty?
It's
Or-
not that, it's just for sake of not putting all, and I don't even know how many departments, 12, 13 departments of the district on this slide. We didn't include that particular piece.
So we can look at how we phrase a question and, try to look and see if we can include that. So last year was our first year we started to ask specific departments to have a survey. So we wanted to include them as well. So, what we'll do is we'll take the survey and kind of reword it and see how we can include that data.
So let me just, let's go to GMS, Gifford Middle School. I'm just trying to understand the data here. So for Gifford Middle School staff in 2017-18, am I understanding that they said that they would give their school a school grade of B?
Yes,
But
what we,
at the district level, the question was changed to department.
School or department, yeah. So the
Gotcha.
question is, how would you rate your school or your department?
Okay.
So
I understand. So we're going to change that wording then for future.
we can look at it, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Do you keep track of the percentage of respondents? Can we get that too? Because I think the response rate makes a difference also in what we see and what we know, both having done these surveys and, for me at least, been subject to them. Somebody has an experience, right, and it throws the whole grade because they got stuck in the parking lot, or something. But the percentage response rate also gives us some indication about what we're seeing in the data.
absolutely.
Okay, all right.
The next slide actually breaks down some of the survey questions. These are not all of the survey questions. They are specific survey questions that were selected to measure certain objectives in the strategic plan. So this is not meant to give you a comprehensive analysis of our student, staff, and parent surveys. It's merely to point out and consolidate on one slide what appears in that Excel framework is several different places. So you can see on this chart on the left-hand side where I've written kind of going up, the top two rows are for objective, I probably should put on my glasses, 2.3, and it gives you those two questions that were selected for the strategic plan to measure that particular objective. The next question is the one that was selected for objective 3.2 and so forth.
Mrs. Berenborg?
Yes, objective 3.3, where staff says, I feel I have opportunities for advancement. This is something that we talked about last year. We looked at, I brought that survey information up from last year at a workshop, and we looked, and the trends were the same things we're seeing right here, where people felt like the advancement opportunity was not there because they didn't know of a program, or So I know, Dr. Moxley, we've talked about this, and are we going to get a presentation later?
Yes, we're in the
Wrote about
process
that,
of
okay.
developing this, and I have some principals who are giving some input on this. I've talked with the principal groups about this. I'm doing some leadership seminars to get some training started, like I'm leading a book study right now on leadership. So there's some activities we're doing, but we need to have an overarching plan. And so we have a starting point, and that needs to be built. And I'm really, to be honest, anxious to get our new HR assistant superintendent on board, because of that will really reside in that area.
That's what I figured. The other point to make in that is that people need to understand, just because you're in the program doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get a position, because probably 100 people in the program and 2 positions open. So do the math, it's not going to happen. But at least it provides them with some understanding of, what should I do if I want to become a leader? What are the first steps? What's a good position for me to go for to help give me those skills? So I'm looking forward to that. And then the other thing you'll see that went down is the in-service programs. And I'm sure that Ms. Stampier's department is really working hard at developing in-service programs that are maybe looking at, I'm not sure, did you look at the data from last year, the comments, and say, okay, these are things that we want to adjust for? Okay, great.
The other thing that I want to go back to is that we have a group of individuals that are aspiring leaders. And that's a very different type of leadership development. And then we have folks that are sitting in assistant principal positions that are wanting to be trained to be principals. And that really is another leadership component. And then you have folks that may be in principal positions that are looking for district level advancement. And so again, looking and trying to develop the aspects of that into a comprehensive plan. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Mrs. Justice, then Mrs. Rosario.
Just quickly, it has been brought to the board before. I don't think it was brought to this board, to previous boards, by the Curriculum and Instruction Department to better staff professional development. Currently, we had executive directors of secondary and elementary kind of trying to balance professional development and I think it's something that, as Mrs. Barrenberg says, is important, as a board member, is important to me. And if it was brought forward to kind of reinforce that department so they could have better professional development personnel or direction, I think that that's something that I would support.
Mrs. Rosario.
I'd like to just, Dr. Moxley, you probably weren't expecting this at this point, and some may not know, but it's probably appropriate for us to mention it here. The book study that Dr. Moxley was just mentioning is something that I have, when she shared it with me, I was pretty much taken aback and extremely humbled that she would take time out of her incredibly busy schedule to put this together. Dr. Moxley has, from what she has told me, I'll let her speak on this herself, but she has noticed a pocket, a need for our district in this particular area with our APs, and that's what this book study, I just want to clarify what this book study is meant to do. It's meant to mentor that particular group of aspiring leaders. And it's more than just a book study. There's going to be, I think, video with it. Dr. Moxley, can you talk a little bit about that? And I mention this, I'm sorry, because it fits perfectly in the goals here of celebrating success, supporting professional learning opportunities, retaining our employees, and providing purposeful communication. It's every single one of the goals that are up here on that chart. So I'm sorry, Dr. Moxley.
Sure. The book study is truly meant to be a book study. So we've selected a leadership book. I did open it up to principals and assistant principals at the Leadership Summit a couple weeks ago. And so we limited it to 20 participants because we wanted to keep the group a little smaller. And so I'm working on that right now to get dates and things like that. That'll be after the school day. Nobody comes out of their building for that. I mean, this truly is a leadership development, and it's taking a a case study, if you will, and applying it to the educational setting. The video part that I think, Mrs. Rosario, you're talking about is one of the other ideas is that I'm exploring is to develop some short webinars, if you will, that we are using the technology through Zoom meetings to be able to come in and say, okay, we're going to talk about the topic Budgeting 101. And folks that are wanting to get into administration or assistant principals that may not have had exposure to how are schools funded and how do we develop a budget, that we would have a 2-hour webinar. They could then use that as part of building their portfolio to get their principal certification. So all that's part of that plan. Those are just some ideas that I shared.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate the work that you're putting into it. It's important that our APs have a support system and a goal for these aspiring positions moving up the ladder. I don't know if we've, how detailed we can be. I don't want to dismiss our teachers, but at the same time, I just wanted to bring light to something that's upcoming, and I appreciate the work that you're putting into that.
Thank you.
So the next slide is the measure of our web, social media, other news story analytics. We track Facebook likes, Twitter impressions, YouTube subscribers, employee all emails, community corner viewers, school messenger calls, and then the school messenger push notifications is new to the 18-19, so we're beginning to track that.
Mrs. Ork, I think this board can take credit for the rise in YouTube subscribers from 155 to 755.
I'd just like to give kudos to Krista Maddox because I think she does an outstanding job. Thoroughly impressed with yesterday at the end of school. Of course, it always pours down raining on the first day of school at dismissal time. And I'm not a parent, but I got tons of alerts and I heard it everywhere. So I appreciate that, and I give this this information, rise in data, as a credit to her. So thank you.
Does school messenger include food services?
Oh, dear God.
Do you know how many food service calls I get?
Got to put money in the account.
Oh, you're talking about payment of accounts.
When that account balance gets low, they call you. Yes, they do.
They don't only call me, they call my husband like 5 minutes later, and it's, you have 5 cents, you're negative 5 cents in your account.
It's amazing
So-
how many notifications you can get like 3 days and still forget to do it, though. Like, I get it, and I'm like, oh, I forgot to do it.
So it,
I feel your pain.
just had to,
Your poor kids. Yeah, they feed them. They're
They
fine.
feed
They
them.
can get a
they
meal.
just drive
Get an
parents
alternative
crazy,
deal.
making sure we put that
Get a turkey sandwich.
money in the account.
Alternative.
All right,
All right.
just
next
fencing
one.
there a little bit.
The next slide is the records of employee retention rates. This is broken out between first year and employees with 1 or more years of service, and it is further broken out by IRCA, which is our teachers union, CWA, non-bargaining, and then the total percentage there.
Mrs. Orr,
Yes.
what is our current, what is the current percentage of teachers that belong to the bargaining group, to IRCEA?
I will have to pull that. I don't know the
67%,
answer to that.
70% or something around there?
I wouldn't even begin to guess.
No?
I would have no
We
basis.
as the department don't really,
I'm just curious, so when I look at this, I'm just curious.
it's a payroll deduction, there's nothing in our system that says, employee A is a member, a dues paying member of.
So when it says IRCEA here, every teacher is
That's
included
every
in that.
teacher,
So we
yes.
should probably change that to teacher rather than IRCEA.
instructional
Or
personnel.
instructional
Yeah.
personnel, rather than IRCEA.
Right,
Okay, so IRCEA here is all teachers?
right.
Okay.
And that would also be true of CWA, would be all your non-instructional,
But then you have non-bargaining to those secretaries.
non-instructional bargaining, I think we would label that or something.
Non-bargaining would be the administrators.
I'm sorry?
Non-bargaining would be your administrators,
Class of,
your pro-tech.
okay.
Sorry. Any other questions on this? To the The next slide. This data is pulled from the equity report, not the African American Achievement Plan, the equity report, which the data does come specifically from the state. I know in the previous slides you have asked for the other racial ethnic backgrounds. For this one, the state only provides these three. So it does show you and I put the student on there, even though the measure is really the staff, but the student percentages are there to give you a frame of reference.
And Madam, and just to be clear, the equity report, for those who just need a reminder, was something that we talked about just, I think, at the last meeting.
Next slide comes from our operations department. It's 3 measures. The first one is the percent reduction in initial life safety violations. The second one is the percent of schools that are doing their mandatory safety and security drills. We have 100% both years. And then the final one is the percent of completed work orders for each school and facility. And even though there's a increase in work orders, that's not necessarily meaning anything other than we're using the system and we're doing well. We did add the completion rate there, and the industry standard is 95%. So in 1819, we achieved that completion rate of 95%.
Kudos to the people that are doing this. So.
It's a lot of work.
And the reduction in the safety violations is awesome, too.
Then the final piece of data is our casual for the cause, the total amount generated through the initiative. Oh, sorry, is there one more slide? Sorry, yes.
Yep.
The penultimate slide, penultimate data slide.
Okay.
All right, and now the final slide is the number of students that have registered to have their data shared through Focus with various partner organizations.
And that's because they're involved in after-school activities or.
Big brother,
you
big
know,
sister or something.
Right, the
GYAC.
Moonshot reading initiative. I'm going to ask Brian, would you go back to right at the very beginning where we have the goals and objectives? It would be slide number 2. So, board members, the question that so we've reported out on all of the data for 18-19, and your current strategic plan is identified to be a 5-year plan, and I think it goes to 2021, 22, according to what is published. And this is the booklet that we get published now. Most of our booklets have been distributed, so we're at a point now where we would order more of these in print, because we do have folks that have asked to have copies of these, and we keep them, you know, in the lobby, and as we go out and work with different entities or organizations, this is the document that goes out, and we speak to this. So I did not have them go ahead and place an order yet, because obviously documents like this, there's a cost of printing these, because I knew that as a board with 3 new board members, you have not necessarily had an opportunity to weigh in on these particular items, the objectives and things like that. So I felt like we needed to kind of pause here for a moment, whether you want to do it today or whether we want to structure a follow-up meeting to be able to go back and say, okay, are these still the same 5 areas? Are the objectives within, because I think in each area, you will see there's 3 objectives under each area with it. When I see student success, I think there is an area called early learning that I don't see an objective. So one of the things that I wanted to just kind of say sometime when we're at that point, I think there is, and again, I know that we keep things aligned, there's 3 in each section, and here I'm saying, let's put a 4th objective in, and that kind of, you know, makes it imbalanced, but really does it. But I do think that early learning is a huge foundation to the educational setting. We do offer VPK, we offer ESC VPK, and to me, it is a gatekeeper to kindergarten readiness. So that's one of the items that I think that I see a gap in our plan. The other item is operational efficiency. We've captured data in climate and culture that has to do with operational efficiencies. The reason I bring that up is when you talk about your strategic plan being linked to the budget, there's no new money coming most of the time. You know, it's cents on the dollar. And in a district where we have a pretty stable or possibly a slight decline in enrollment, that means no new revenue is coming. The question, if you're realigning priorities through your strategic plan, then you're having to look at using your resources differently. So you want to go and look for efficiencies in the organization where you can generate resources that can be redeployed. So you may stop doing some things to free up resources to invest them in other arenas. So that's a conversation we would need to have. That's a bigger conversation than today, and we can kind of, that's a philosophical, to be honest with you, because there's, you know, again, I've said you invest $1 one time, you can only invest it one time one way, but you have options on how you invest that $1. But again, the priorities may change from year to year or board to board. So I think that's a point of discussion. The third item is that this is a lot of data. I mean, that spreadsheet is a lot of data, very important data, and that data is used by different groups. So if we're working on the African American Student Achievement Plan, we're going to look at discipline, and we're going to drill down even deeper than what that spreadsheet talks about. But staff does that, and with the Equity Committee for the DSEG order, they're drilling down even deeper than what that, based on what their needs are. You have other committees, other groups, high school principals, elementary principals, middle school principals. They're drilling down in that attendance data even deeper than what we have presented here, as they should. So if we're looking at recruitment, whatever the plan is, I think that when we talk to our business leaders and folks that are working in partnerships and making significant investments in different initiatives that have an educational component for us, they're looking at some other gatekeepers. And so one of the things that I wanted to suggest to the board is if these are, whenever we land on what our items are, what our overarching categories, and if they stay the same, whatever, that we have what we call the 10 KPIs, key performance indicators. Call it the 10 steps to success, or you know, the 7 keys to success, whatever they are. But we highlight those gatekeepers, like, for example, kindergarten readiness. That's the gatekeeper to the entrance to school. You know, how many students do we have that come that are kindergarten ready, literally kindergarten ready? What is that percentage? If it's low, then we need to look at what are we doing with outreach to our VPK partners, our VPK program. Third grade literacy, third grade reading, that's another gatekeeper. You know,
Dr. Mokhtar, I just want to interrupt you for a second. These are wonderful things, and I'm hearing you, and I'm trying to digest all of this wonderful information that you're sharing. But I don't know two things. I don't know that I was prepared to have this conversation today, and I would also love to be able to discuss some of these things with you, but I'd like to see these ideas on paper.
absolutely.
So, and I didn't mean, I know I interrupted you, but I did want to, I'm just wondering when that happens.
Sure, absolutely. And this was not meant to get into this discussion today, because you're not at that point. I think I'm saying this because these are some things that if this is an idea you want to explore, then I will do the homework. I will I will go and put all this and build this out on paper so that you have it in your hands, and that would be the follow-up workshop. If you're not interested in that kind of I call it, I hate to say the elevator speech, but it's that Cliff Notes version where as a business person, you're saying, okay, I'm looking for, you know, what are the gatekeepers along the way? So I offer that just as food for thought, and what do we want to do for next steps?
So I'm interested.
Okay.
Okay.
Mrs. Rosario, Mrs. Berenborg.
Dr. Moxley, I'm on board with you, and I think that we probably need a full day, to really discuss this with each department at some point, because I'm sure that different departments would have an investment in these areas. I think that even if, maybe even a retreat, at some point, because one of the things that I brought up as a new board member coming on board, which you weren't here, is that as I read through this document, I realized that a lot of these objectives were not measurable. And we need to change the wording, though they might be good in intention, there is no true measure to it. And for those who are unfamiliar with that, the measurable objective is really something that we can look at and see we've made improvement in this and we have not, or we have not made improvement in this. And that's the measurable objective. How are we measuring the success in this goal? That's something that I have been extremely concerned with, and I'm glad that you did not ask this to go to print, because I have been wanting us to review this. Our financial, our budget, we actually did it in reverse. And unfortunately, we did not, we had other issues that we have been faced with, an outgoing superintendent and incoming superintendent. So we've kind of, next year, I think we need to refine our process in that our strategic plan should be first. It should be out, in my opinion, on our desk for every decision that we make. It is the driving force of the entire district. I think that once the strategic plan is revised in some of these areas, that it is then given to the school principals. The school principals then take this kind of like an upside down triangle, and they take the broader topics of the goals, and then in their school, they would kind of narrow down how are we going to now implement this goal so that we can see the outcome would be that measurable success, and then, of course, bring it full circle to us. So I am on board with doing this. I have a lot of questions about it, and some of the concerns that we have with our lowest performing, our ESL, which is our largest growing population in our district, our ESE, of course, our Black and Brown students, some of those closing the achievement gap. Though we can kind of see it in some of these areas, you can't really find it. You can't really find it articulated that that is a goal of ours, and I think that that's a problem. So we do need to review this in depth, specifically, and I understand that yes, there is a 5-year, but I actually believe in doing research for strategic plans. Most strategic plans, because they can change even with new board members, that it maybe 5 years might be too long. Maybe a 4-year strategic plan might be appropriate, a revised one of sorts, and then maybe from now until then, I don't know how we're gonna, but that's probably a discussion for another time. But I'm on board with you. I did not hear from anyone else about the 10 KPI, the 10 keys of performing indicators. But I'm interested in having that conversation as well. And so I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Berenberg.
Yeah, I was going to mention, if you look at page 4, those aren't measurable. They're really nice. They're good to look at. But that's my point as well. They need to be SMART goals. And I will tell you, as a principal in the past, if I wanted to purchase something and did a request, it had to be noted where in my school improvement plan that I was going to be attaching that money to help in that area. Mm-hmm. And I think the same thing should be going on for when you're asking us to spend money. I think when you're asking us, okay, could we spend $53,000 on this? I think an objective needs to be given to us on the plan. And I think that would be a really great thing to move forward to do, because it gets everybody thinking about the strategic plan and what it is that we're trying to focus on.
Okay. Something else I I don't know if we've done this in the past, but I actually have, during the principal training, is actually spend a few hours with the principals going through this with the new measurables that we have and making sure that they really understand it versus here's the strategic plan,
Right, right.
you know, look it over. But also doing a real review with the principals and the leadership there. Mrs. Rosario?
Just a follow-up. The other day, I met with Ronald Fagan and had some questions regarding our budget, of course. And I had this question, I asked him the question, how can we ensure that our budget, that our strategic plan is aligned with the budget and vice versa? And one of the things that he suggested, which maybe we'll have that discussion when we have this review, is he took out the monitoring framework. And what he suggested, which I had not thought of before, was that there would be an additional column. And this additional column somewhere along the line would show us that this goal is being funded from this place.
Correct.
And then eventually, once we are used to this kind of format, that would be in real easy, user-friendly terms, we as board members will be able to, that's probably what
That's
you
the
were
same thing I was
suggesting.
referring.
Yeah, and that's where it reminded me of my conversation with Ronald Fagan, and that we could actually verify, you know, that this money was used for that and so on and so forth. So that, I just wanted to bring that up because some may not have had that specific kind of conversation, but I appreciate the,
Yeah, I'd just like to see those objective numbers when we're doing requests.
I think there's two things. I think that I agree with the chart. I also agree in your board agenda item, when you have the item and we're requesting to make this purchase, that there is the strategic plan, goal, and objective highlighted for you, so you can see the connection both ways. The second item I just wanted to highlight is, I think your timing is fine right now. I mean, I know that we're saying we did it a little bit backwards, but remember, we're trying to shore up some things. We're trying to be grounded with our budget. You know, we're getting that through. But that means you're at the start of where your cycle needs to be in starting your budget process that will start in January this year. So we can take the time now here in the next 2 months to really have whatever the day session is and follow up and really get it right. And then you get in a system that December and January, every year, you look and review your strategic plan before you do your budget cycle that should start in January, February, depending on when the legislative session is. But you do that every year in January, you review your strategic plan, and then you've got it all shored up, ready to start the budget cycle.
A quick logistic question. You said that, what I'm hearing in this conversation is we're all interested in reviewing this and diving into it more deeply and spending a bunch of time. You said that we're running out of these and we have to make a decision on whether or not to print more. What I'm hearing in this conversation is the answer would be no, because
Correct.
we're going to revise it. But does that leave us then without sufficient materials for those who need them?
What we will do is we will reference, we can print it from the online version, and we just make a copy. You know, so as needed, if somebody asks, we just go and make a copy. It won't be in this glossy booklet, but they'll have the information. It is electronic, so everything's online, so I think we'll be okay.
And so what I'm hearing in this is that we are all interested in doing that, that our timing is okay as we head into the next budget cycle.
Correct.
But sooner is probably better than
Correct.
later. Does the, is this something that it's certainly appropriate to do as a board, but we'll have a new superintendent coming on? And how does, so I'm delighted to keep working with you on this, and I like and appreciate the ideas that you just suggested. But does that have any bearing, do you think, on our planning for this?
I don't, and this is my personal opinion, because the strategic plan is the board's. And I think that you have a great grounded strategic plan. It needs to be updated. It needs to reflect the vision of this board as you're working together. And so the superintendent coming in, if it's were me coming in, I would be thrilled to have a current, grounded strategic plan to guide me as I develop the budget for the upcoming year that I would now be responsible for. So I think it's a perfect timing.
I think it was a good question. I think one of the things that I'm reminded of constantly is if we had all applied to be the superintendent, all of your board members had applied to be the superintendent, we would not have been considered for the job. We don't hold the qualifications for the position. So as important it is for the board priorities to be reflected in the strategic plan, it's equally as important for the instructional leader of the district to be involved in that. So I'm thankful that you'll be here to help us to do any revisions, and I think it's important for us to remember that truly we're here to support the work that you do, but that you are the one with the experience to help lead us in that.
I'd be delighted to see that workshop happen sooner rather than later, and really to block out as much time as we need. You know, Mrs. Rosario suggested a day retreat, or, I think this is a foundational document for everything that we do moving forward, and if there is anything that we're going to dig into, so I would love to see that scheduled coming up.
My suggestion would be that it would not be on a day that we have all our board meetings. It needs to
Exactly.
be a separate day that is, you're free of any time pressures during the day.
I prefer to call it a board workshop. Retreat sounds like it's going to be fun, and I know it's probably not going to be that much fun. It's going to be a lot of work.
Talking data is always.
Working retreat.
What you think retreat? We're going away somewhere. We're going to be enjoying ourselves. That's not the case, okay?
Depending on one's concept of fun.
We'll be sure not to smile, all right?
That's right.
I might be with Dr. McMahon. I kind of like digging into this stuff. I got a warped sense of fun,
You
too.
have to be careful what words we use, though. Retreat, we don't want to use. Okay, is that it? All right.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your hard work and, okay,
Why don't we take 10 minutes, and we'll be back at 1:11, okay? to order. It's 1:12, and we are in the middle of our board discussion session, and we are about to jump into our budget workshop on how we're going to tie the budget to the strategic plan. Dr.
Okay,
Moxley.
board members, so this is kind of an open discussion, and I think we started to talk about it as we were talking about the strategic plan. I think we also want to make sure that we've answered any questions. I know that many of you have had an opportunity to come in and meet with Mr. Fagan, and we were able to answer individual questions, and we are still working on our budget. We've made some adjustments as we're going along. We can certainly address those generic questions. I think one of the things, so I'll start the discussion here, that one of the things that is a challenge, which can also be an opportunity, but the challenge we're facing right now is shoring up our budget where we are with the strategic plan. And Mrs. Rosario, I think you said it, that we've kind of flipped it. At this point in time, where we are with the strategic plan, knowing that we're going to embark, I think the items that as we go through this current budget, how is the best way to communicate to the public how this links to the strategic plan? I think there are some departmental budgets that address for the equity. Like, for example, we talked about, we had we had the update on, with the 4 schools that were under Dr. Hodges, which was part of that plan. There was a keynote speaker we had, which was part of the plan. And so the budgets that address those kinds of things as well. Student achievement, that can come in a variety of places, in instructional materials, comes in salaries, it comes in a variety of places. So I'm going to kind of, if we can just kind of have open discussion, I think that from Mr. Fagan and I, taking the spreadsheet that we currently have, that Brian McMahon has completed, we can now go back with finance, we could go back and do that, but it will be looking at last year's data driving this year's budget, which would be the context I think we would be in at this point in time.
So can we just ask a question? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you ready? All right, so my first question would be if we could go to page 32 of 101 and look at Vero Beach Elementary School.
Yes.
If you look at the variance there, it's a $500,000 variance. It's an odd variance considering the variance that we had in some other places. And when you look at their actual expenditures, they were at 3.5 and then 2.6, and we have them at an estimated budget of 2.1 for the 19-20 school year. When I look at the other variances at other schools, I'm seeing $14,000 decrease, $9,000 increase. So can you talk a little bit about a $500,000 decrease in just the non-discretionary salary line?
Yes, ma'am. Well, first off, let me start off by saying that hopefully when we prepare the tentative budget, the final budget that you're going to see this year's budget compared to last year's budget. Because from where I come from, you want to know where you left the schools at the fall of last year to the spring of this year. How are they set up, dollar for dollar? We can also get into the variances of the staffing they have, but that would be the next level. Right now, it's dollar for dollar. In this particular example, what you're seeing is the decrease in 19-20 is because of the reduction in the, when we change the way we calculate class size and the number of teachers. When we remove those 13 teachers, 8 teachers from the schools, in order to make room in the 19-20 budget for that reduction, we took that full amount from Vero Beach. All it is an accounting entry. On your final budget, we're going to spread those 8 teachers against all the schools. This was basically think of it this way, a quick and dirty calculation to take the budget reduction down, but we only hit 1 school.
So that explanation is fine. I don't know that I love it, but I understand it. When you look at the 17-18 actual expenditures to the 18-19 expenditures, we see over $500,000, almost $1 million difference, variance from the actual expenditures from 17-18 to 18-19. Can you explain that to me?
The only thing I can say is I'm looking at the salary line, that's almost $1 million. One of 2 things could have happened. One, you've had more teachers were at the school
Nope.
that were actually filled versus vacancies.
Nope.
Nope, okay. With that, I'd have to dig into the details.
So I point this out because I think it's important as we move forward that in previous years, I believe there were some issues with the budgets that we had received and staffing allocations, and there were some discrepancies, and the numbers were not always as accurate as they should or could have been. I do not hold you to these numbers. These are not your numbers to report. You were reporting them to us, but they are not your numbers. But I just think it's important as we move forward, because people look at this like a Bible. And this is number one, a tentative budget that will change. But number two, I said at our last meeting, we are in a better place right now than we have been in the past, because I do not put faith in the numbers that we have had in years past for me as a board member. When I look at previous budget books, from tentative to beginning budget, $1 million. There's no explanation for a non-discretionary salary at Vero Beach Elementary School going down $1 million. There's just not. Average teacher salary is 65. With everything in it, if your for one teacher, what's the staffing amount for one teacher?
65,000.
65,000, that's what I said,
65
yeah.
is your
How many
thing,
teachers,
yeah.
non-discretionary staff, how many teachers is that?
Right.
It's crazy.
Correct.
So, I think it's just important, I think Socrates said something about change. It's important to focus on moving forward rather than always living in the past. And I think as we build this budget, it's going to be, and for us as a board, or just for our community in general, it's going to be important to not always look at some of the past numbers, because I don't believe that they were accurate.
Yes, ma'am.
May I also say something on that? Because I think you bring up a great point, Mrs. Justice. And one of the things that we've talked about, because when you go to budget, you should be able to have an allocation formula, a staffing formula that says, if your enrollment is this is how many support staff you get, this is what you get for administration, guidance, whatever it may be. And I just think that we need to bring some procedural things into place all in one location to help support the budgeting cycle. Not that we don't do it, but you raise this point, and we need to be able to answer that.
So to go, based on this, I know I had met with, this was one of my questions, why is the variance here? Because this is your first budget cycle with us, I asked next year that we not do this, because it's very confusing when you first look at that, is that we make sure that if we're gonna save, or have a cost reduction of $60,000 to Vero Beach Elementary, put it to Vero Beach Elementary. If we have a cost reduction to Sebastian Elementary, we put it there, and not have to do this, because as someone that's watching this budget and trying to keep up with it, these are the type of things I'm gonna have to be looking at come up August 26th, and I don't like having all these last minute things that I have to make sure that I keep track of, because that's where I feel like maybe some things could get overlooked, as always trying to do everything the very last minute like it seems like we had done in the past. So I prefer us not to ever do that again. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. If I can, generally, I like to do, when you're doing the budget process, do divisions first. Divisions should be easier, should be any major changes in staffing or initiatives. You can generally knock those out somewhere between February and March. You don't want to go too early, because you don't know what legislation is going to do. But at least you know what your staffing needs are, any new initiatives that are in the division level. About February, March, and April, you should be able to be done with your schools. You know what your FTE is. Your FTE drives how many teachers you have at a school, except for your ESC. ESC bases upon the children's IEP. We work with Title, we work with IDA on the funding for that. We build that into the model. So generally by May or June, you're done with your school allocation. You now are waiting on the state to come in and finalize what they're going to give you. If they give you more money, you can put it into a holding account. If they cut you a little bit, you can go in and make some slight adjustments. But those numbers are very, very small. So basically, you're done before you end the year. So when you roll into July and August, you're just going through the process of getting your trim done, having your advertisements, voting on your millage, and voting on your budget. Also on the formatting of this layout, I kind of like the idea of maybe presenting you with the items that the school can control, okay, and the things that the school can't control. So it's kind of like what I call things above the line and below the line. Schools don't have to pay their light bill, we do. So if the light bill is fluctuating and you see some changes, we have someone watching that. But for the things that the school controls, that's what you're most doing. How many teachers, how many guidance, how many whatever's at the school, so you know if there's been any deviation from that school. It also helps you zero in on what you're looking for versus maybe what we're looking for the overall budget. And such as things as Moonshot, Best and Brightest, and a few other things that we didn't load the budget estimate for 1920, but you know they had an expenditure in the prior year. We can add some expenditures, we can add some appropriations, there are some guesses. So the variances become real small, therefore your questions become a little bit less. It's a little bit more stable.
Mrs. Barrenborg?
Yeah, speaking of that above the line, below the line, because I'm used to seeing the above the line. As a building level person, that's what you're looking at. What can you control? I think I asked for this year and for next year, at least moving on, if we could look at discretionary budgets for each of the schools and what they started with and what they ended with, so that we're making sure that we're controlling overspending. I know, as you know, I gave you an example of something I had in the past. I just want to make sure that we're being fair from school to school.
Or equitable.
Not so much equitable. I'm talking about overspending by a principal. That happens. It does. And so I think I'm sure we have some safeguards in place
Right.
so that we can make sure, because otherwise other principals lose their money.
Correct.
And we don't want that to happen.
I just want to speak to that point. I know Dr. Schiff is going to speak, but just to your point, or just about discretionary budgets at schools in general, I know we've had discussions about title schools. And for me, philosophically, I have an issue with equitable discretionary funding. I feel like we have some schools, Gifford Middle School, we saw, for example, does not have instructional coaches, right? They're not a title school, they don't get the money for that, and we're not supplying money for them to have that, but they may need that. Beachland Elementary is another school, not a title school. They don't have additional funding for those types of things, but they may need it. So while we watch overspending, I think we also have to make sure that our discretionary funding of discretionary budgets, funding of discretionary budgets at schools is equitable for our students.
Dr. Schiff?
That doesn't come out of discretionary, though, on salary.
That would be your staffing
Yeah.
for your schools.
Right,
Yeah.
but just not even a coach, let's say an after-school program, for example, or something like that, that a principal may want to do, or additional support programs within their school that they might want to create. If the principal has discretionary budget to do that, one school may need that more than another school would, where that other school might get title funds that they might be able to pay for that.
Dr. Schiff?
Says, you alluded to it, but I just want to make it clear for people who may be looking at the budget or watching. Can you talk a little bit about the things that, because we don't know the specific amounts allocated to schools, they get lumped in particular places that look like they're inflated in one place or deflated in another place? You mentioned the Moonshot, the Best and Brightest. So for example, those all get loaded into, I think it's district services or district-wide funding, which make it look like the budgets for the individual schools are decreasing dramatically, but that's going to balance out. Can you speak a little bit to what's in those categories and by when you anticipate that process will happen so that the budget itself better reflects what the actual school budgets will be?
Well, what we'd like to do as an example for Moonshot. Schools are entitled to the grant, they get the allocation, we just don't put their budget in. We generally load the budget after we receive reimbursement from the grant. But we can back that up and say, well, look, historically, what have you normally gotten? We can load that appropriation in the beginning of the year to avoid that variance. Currently, we just put that in a holding account in the back on the district, and then we push it out as the year goes by. Same thing with Best and Brightest. We know certain schools will get it, we don't know which ones or how much. So we load it in a holding account, we wait for information from the state, then we push it out. But that would be an example of something above and below the line. We could put it below the line, put in a number to hold it to keep the variance small. At the end of the year, whatever the state is allocated is what you get. And then we could talk about that variance too. Coming back to the discretionary, not positive how the district has done discretionary spending on the way, but Dr. Mockley and I have spoken about a staff allocation model. So discretionary spending is generally based on your FTE and maybe some special circumstances at the school. So if you load everyone up, each school with 300 children get the same allocation, except maybe if they have unique programs. So you can control that allocation as well as control the spending as well. But you set everybody up at the same playing field to begin with at the beginning of the year. And the only schools that get extra are, of course, your Title I schools, and et cetera.
Okay. Questions on that?
Just, again, for the record, another category on that was school recognition, which all gets loaded into district-wide services and hasn't gotten filtered back to the individual school budgets yet, and that's $765,000.
Yes, ma'am.
So, because in each of these, if somebody were, looking through it, it looks like each school budget has decreased, almost all the budgets have
Right.
decreased except the charters. The charters they come into our budget, but we're not in control of their spending, and in each of these, it looks like our schools are going down in ways that doesn't really accurately reflect
Correct.
that their budgets are going down that significantly.
And I think on the school recognition, it's once the schools are recognized for the grades,
Right.
they're they take the information and go back to their SAC committee and determine how that school recognition money is going to be spent. So until we
Right.
identify that, it's just not loaded at the school level yet.
Can, so when are we gonna see, I hear that we're gonna shift it over and put it in, when are we gonna see that?
Our plan is to try and do it for your final budget. It may not look as pretty as I really want it for your next year's budget, because certain things I don't have yet. I can't talk about it. One thing we do want to do is to try and add in a charter school column for you, to where you can look at overall for the district as a whole, this is your budget, this is your charter school allocation, and this is your total. So you can see the numbers. Right now, you see it kind of broken up between school, but you can't articulate real quick like how much FTE is that and how much dollar is that. So we hope to do this by the September to group this in that way.
September 10th is the night that we're supposed to approve this, so are we gonna, maybe that morning go over? I don't
should.
typically like doing things the day of, but,
The 28th?
We have a workshop on the 28th. We
so
hope to
the
have it by then.
28th, it's all gonna be loaded in here,
Yes, ma'am.
and we're just basically reviewing what we're gonna approve on the,
Yes, ma'am. That's the plan, is for you to have a better looking format that you can articulate better.
I want to move forward in the conversation. You brought up charter, so I'd like to talk about it a little bit. A couple different things. We're going to be having a new charter school open at some point. I'm not exactly sure when they're going to open, but that is something I think as a board and for future boards to think about, because our FTE is going to drop. And that means we are going to have to, we will still have schools, we will still have classrooms, we will still have utility bills, but we will have less money coming in to pay for those things. We're going to have to look at cutting beyond staff, beyond just staff. So that's just something that stays on my radar. The other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit, and I think it's important when we look at charter and traditional schools, while they are all public schools, there are different requirements in a number of different ways, and not just capital improvements, which we talk about, capital outlay funding, and requirements of SREF and those types of differences. But there is a difference, and it's been highlighted most recently with career planning requirements, with mental health requirements, with financial management requirements for our students, that there are certain requirements that public schools have to rules, and Richard Corcoran has made it very clear that the Board of Education is going to start really holding districts responsible or really accountable for making sure that those things are happening. Charter schools are not required. They do not have the same rules. They can choose to participate in those things, but I think it's important that we remember that when we get those dollars, we have requirements how to spend those in certain ways, and we don't have the flexibility that other that charter schools may have. And just to state, while I am a supporter of charter schools, if I was a charter school parent, I would want to know why. If financial planning is not being taught, I don't understand why the Board of Education would want public schools and to have these things and doesn't feel that charter school students would benefit from them as well. And that's not for anyone to answer. It's just a statement that I'd like to make. I do not understand it. In the future, and I don't know how we're doing it in this budget, Dr. Moxley, right, but I know you will. I know in the summer there was some new mental health rules that were put into place with a requirement. I'm sure we can build those into the standards, but does that change school budgets at all for you with high schools and those types of?
What we're doing right now, and that's under Dr. Packert's leadership and Dr. Parendozzi, is we have a timeline of building our plan of how we're going to implement that, and that is due, I want to say, December 1st. But we have to have that plan designed, and that's what they're working on right now. How are we going to integrate that into the existing? We have gotten an FAQ from the Department of Education. They're not saying you have to do it this way versus this way. They're leaving that up for districts. Some districts are looking at, okay, what are the courses where this can be infused in? It's 5 hours. It doesn't have to be, okay, here's a 5 hour. It could be an hour over 5 weeks. It could be an hour over 5 months. How does that best fit in? But it's every student. So if you pick, say, for example, the Hope class, it naturally fits in that, but that's only hitting a certain grade level. So you have to really look at that. That's the same with the financial literacy component there. I think that we can hit very easily, and that's infused in another course, no problem. But the mental health is one they're looking at right now. So we will integrate it into coursework that's already offered there. So it doesn't require additional staffing. It may require some additional materials. We also have some partnerships, and there's some components we're looking at with some of our partnerships with substance abuse, some of those types of effective kinds of behavior trainings that we already have. Some of those components do meet the criteria. Again, we're doing an inventory and a review of that.
And I would think what you just mentioned as far as the strategic partnerships are so important. I was happy that was part of our strategic plan, because I think that those partnerships are so important. We have support from organizations that get funding from CSAC, from the hospital district, and that helps to alleviate some of the costs sometimes that we have, and we're grateful for those partnerships. So thank you for acknowledging that, and the more work we can do with other community organizations, it does take a village, to quote Mrs. Clinton.
I have a comment, but do you care if I go? Okay, thank you. So I have been talking to Dr. Moxley about maintaining, because when you look at our budget now and how we've went back a couple $1 million in our reserves, I had talked to her about the enrollment in each school. It seems that we're not maximizing. If we look at business-wise, if for a school to break even, 650 students, I believe is the number.
For an elementary school.
600.
For an elementary school specifically.
Is that all schools, though?
No, that's elementary.
Elementary,
Your-
okay.
Your middle's a
Okay.
little higher than that.
Okay, so when we look at that, I look across the district and I've counted maybe 6 of our schools were at 650. The rest of them were below that. We're gonna have to have a conversation about if we have a school that's maintaining 398 here and right down the street, just a few blocks away, that school's maintaining 400. It does not make sense, because we are going to have to adjust to the times. We have to adjust, because I don't want to be the first school district to go bankrupt because we're not willing to face the facts that times are changing, that the new charter school, if we look at over the next 2 to 3 years, we're looking at 800 to 900 students that could possibly switch over there, which takes me to a second conversation that I've had with Dr. Moxley, is that I know that our parents love magnet schools. Our magnet waiting list is off the charts. My son was on a waiting list for 4 years. Finally, he's been approved after 4 years. But I look at, those are families that if we know that some of our schools have low enrollment numbers, but we know that our families love magnet schools, then why aren't we trying to strategically look at, why don't we put another magnet school here? And then what that does, we maintain, we take our families that are on that waiting list, at the charter schools, or even prevent them from going over to the charter schools. And we give our parents and our students that choice that they want. And Magnet, I'm going to tell you, is the best for me as a parent, seems the best of both worlds, because you have those extra programs that we as the district offer, and then you have that individualized special curriculum, let's say like at Osceola Magnet, that's science and math, or Rosewood, it's the reading and the core subjects. So I just really think that us as a board, we have to be thinking ahead and not wait for the charters to come in. We have to get ahead of it. So I have a lot of hands up. We'll start down here and then we'll go that way.
I have a couple comments. Studies have shown that it is not school class size that actually affects achievement and performance as much as school size. I have a very large concern with pushing the limits of school size up to 650 for elementary schools. I know I've spoken with principals of elementary schools, and in general, the ideal size for student performance is around 500 students, 550 students. So I would have some real concerns about pushing some of our schools up to some of those numbers, 650, 700. We do have a couple, and it is at that point we need to start looking at additional assistant principals, or it's not ideal. So I have some concerns about student achievement when we discuss that. The second point I would like to make is that I want every school to be a choice school. Every school to be a choice school. Magnet schools have different transportation. Not every parent that we serve and not every student that we serve has the means to be able to get to school being driven by a parent. A lot of our students rely on transportation. And so I think it's important when we make decisions, while I want to give choice to every parent, I think it's important for parents to be able to make those choices for their students. There are students who go to their zone school, and that needs to be a school of choice as well. So my philosophy would be more along the lines of, rather than just creating magnet schools, how do we support the schools that we currently have and help them to individualize and to engage their parents? I've said before, I will say again, parent involvement is the #1 driver of student success. We see our charter schools and our magnet schools do well because they have actively involved parents. Osceola Magnet School has a parent requirement for volunteering at the school, and while that's lovely, the reality is that not every student's parents can afford to or have the time to or the ability to volunteer, and those students shouldn't be penalized because of that. We are here to serve every student. So while I hear some of your points, and I don't disagree with the fact that we do need to do some planning because the opening of the charter school will affect us, I have some very real concerns for making sure that we are serving every single student regardless of their parents' ability to be involved in their education.
Just 2 points on that. And I like having this conversation right now. But you said something 500 to 550. But if we look at the number of students that are in our elementaries, we're averaging about 400 at a lot of our schools. So we're still 100, 150 away from being at your number. So that's one point I wanted to make. And also the other point is, the magnet schools, they do have the opportunity to have transportation. So just because you go to a magnet doesn't mean that you can't have
It's a
that.
limited transportation. It's limited.
But
It's not the same as a normal, as a traditional public school that isn't a magnet school. And we do, it's my understanding, keep our elementary schools at 90% capacity in order to be able to accommodate any students who move into their zoned school, so that we can accommodate those students. So that's something that we made a choice as a board and a district to do, and I do think that's very important, again, to make sure that every student has access to their zone school.
Yeah, but we're declining, so we're going to have to adjust somehow.
Well, our FTE increased. In the spring count, we actually received additional FTE. Our student count actually went up.
But it's a conversation to have, the vacancies that we do have within our buildings. Go ahead, Dr. Schiff.
This is a really big conversation, and we won't get to all of it now. And so I'm going to actually agree with both of you and hopefully add a little more to the conversation, which is, one is to point out that we are a choice district. And the choice doesn't only indicate whether or not you can go to a charter school or a public school, but our district is designated as a choice district because you can select to go to an out-of-district school, an out-of-zone school. One. Two, I agree with you, Mrs. Justice, about smaller school size. I don't disagree, and I think one of our strengths as a district that we haven't really communicated well is the strength of our neighborhood schools, is that as who we are as a district, that by having these small schools and these small elementary schools, what we are doing is supporting families and communities and neighborhoods in ways that are best for learning. But they're not always economically feasible, and I think that's where we get to. Dr. Moxley and I had this conversation just this morning, so thanks for bringing it up, and at least I feel like I know what you're talking about. So there's this fine line to be walked between the strength of a neighborhood school and how that empowers kids and families, but also the fact that when resources are sparse, how we have to manage those. And even if we do go to magnet schools, we take existing schools and we convert to magnet schools. I don't know how that works. I don't know how we would do that by bringing in what kinds of resources that potentially simultaneously offers options that we didn't already have that can potentially diffuse some of the impact of, and we're not talking about going to enormous schools, we're talking about 600. So the difference between the number you're using and the number you're using is not that big. When we're talking about schools that we're running at 350, 400, that's where we're losing resources that we could better apply. It will still leave us, though, with buildings. If, for example, we combine two schools or we create a magnet school, that leaves us with expenses still to that building. And the point being, we have that as a resource that we can then use for other things. We can bring community resources into that, right? We can use that as an asset, potentially. So that's part of, a bigger conversation consistent not just with strategic planning like we were just talking about it, about culture and climate and a strong workforce and all of that. But this specific thing is how do we manage our capital and human resources to get the, I'm trying to avoid using a phrase I don't want to use. I really don't want to. I'm trying to avoid using the best bang for our buck, which I really was not the phrase I wanted to use, and I can't get to another one more quickly. But how do we take the resources we have, use them most intelligently to create the best options? And I think that's what you're pointing to, Mrs. Zork, and I don't think you are disagreeing, Mrs. Justice. It's just, this is the conversation, this is part of the conversation that we would have in that board workshop that will not be a retreat because it won't be any fun. But this is part of it. It's not just how do we take what we've got to build culture and climate. It's how do we marshal limited resources in ways that give us more flexibility and creativity to do things we haven't been able to do in the past. So I appreciate you bringing up the conversation, and we're certainly not going to resolve it here.
No, absolutely not.
But I think it has to be on that agenda as well, because I think moving forward, when we look to the impact of incoming charter schools or changes in education policy in the state, frankly, that could not benefit us in the long run. We have to think longer term about how are we going to get in front of, as you're saying, how are we going to get in front of it rather than simply always be at the effect of what others are imposing on us.
Just to
That was a
follow up
long-winded
to her
soapbox.
conversation, we're coming to Mrs. Rosario. We're not only looking at competition is good. It strengthens you. It makes you stronger. It makes you
It's sometimes good.
It makes you better at what you do. But we're also looking at the change in the state model with the school funding for the private schools, the individual funding through Step Up. So we have a couple of our private schools in the community that are expanding because they're going to be taking advantage of that. So it's not that we just have the new charter school coming in. We also are looking at traditional public school students that are going to have those choices. So how do we keep those students with us is another
Oh,
point I
and
wanted to make.
Can I just follow up? This came up, and I can't, I think this was in a conversation I had with Dr. Moxley. No, I know what it was. It was in the conversation I had with Mr. Fagan and Dr. Moxley about our school numbers are calculated at the beginning of the year. And the state decides that our FTE is at a certain rate. If we go above that rate for some reason, it doesn't change the amount of money we get. It just means that it spreads it more thinly. So getting more students doesn't necessarily give us more dollars, though getting less students gives us a lower FTE calculation. If we get less students, this I'm not clear, you could clarify for me. If we get less FTEs in the year for which it has already been calculated, will it decrease? Or does that work? It doesn't work in reverse, right? So if we get less students, we get less money. But if we get more students, we don't necessarily get more money. It just gives us a lower dollar amount FTE. So we have to be conscious too about how that works. Unless we have more students at the end of the year on which next year's calculation will be based, if it changes in the middle of the year, that only harms us financially, not in terms of the services or who we provide, but financially, we don't actually get, we don't get more resources because we get more students in the middle of a school year, but we do get less resources the next year if we get less students.
But our
Did I
cost
say that right?
Our cost
Yes,
doesn't go
ma'am.
down the
Yeah.
same, right? So you can
Yeah,
get less
but our
students,
costs,
but
right.
your costs stay.
But our costs stay the same. And if we get more students, our costs increase, but our dollars from the state do not simultaneously
Dollar
increase.
for dollar, correct. They
Right?
prorate
We get the same, so what happens is
They
if we have
prorate it.
100, sorry, you can
And
explain it better than
they
me.
will prorate it.
They'll prorate it.
The educational budget is fixed based on X number of students. If I go down, I take a hit, but if I go up, I don't get a dollar for dollar increase for every
Right.
child, because the state's gonna say, well, you went up, you went down, they're gonna do a proportionate share, and you get a little bit more or a little bit less.
But you do get more.
Yes, but it is,
But
we
it's
won't,
not, I understand.
correct.
It's not proportionate to what you
Actual.
will expend for the students. You have to spend more per student, but we don't get an additional FTE for that student from the state. We simply we go from, 4,800 to 4,500 per student, or however that
Yes, ma'am.
balances
And
out.
further to that point, if you look at ESE levels 1 through 3, you don't get an additional ESE allocation if you have students that come in with ESE need. I mean,
Correct.
that's just the way it goes.
Mrs. Rosario?
I think that we have the ability to be an innovative district in planning our creativity and how are we going to address the changing times. What I would like for us to be is a proactive board in our district. I want us to be able to stand out. I do not want us to do what I've noticed past boards do, and that is be reactive. And so the changing times happen, and then we react, and then we make a decision after the fact. So if we see these changes coming toward us, why not start having those conversations? So I appreciate bringing this up. I don't know if there's anyone more in favor of school choice than I. Many people know I homeschool my child, and for us, it has been an option that we welcomed, and it was not an easy decision, but it worked, and it is successful for my son. With that said, I understand parents who want to utilize their school choice. I understand it, and I respect it 100%. And I am not against charter schools at all. I think just what Mrs. Zork just mentioned, that, competition is good and choice is good. Every parent has to be able to make that choice, whatever is best for their child. But at the same time, I see the impact that it may have on us financially, right? It's not about, in my opinion, it's not about feeling the need to be greedy with the money and not wanting to share it. But I do see that we do not expect to have, we might have growth in our county in terms of new people moving in, but that's not necessarily, there's no surety that those people moving in will have younger families, with families with children, so that, we can kind of offset for this new charter school coming in. When I was in Port St. Lucie, I worked at Westwood High School. And Westwood High School at the time was a D school. I was just coming up from an F when I joined their team. Westwood High School was unique in their location. It was in Fort Pierce, and it traditionally had a not favorable school grade. I think that's probably the political way of saying it. But they had an incredible veterinary tech program that was outstanding. And it was a program, they literally had the entire vet. It looked like a surgery center. It looked like a vet office. And a veterinary, they had partnerships with local veterinary offices, doctors, nurses, that sort of thing. And the students, when they graduated with a vet tech degree. And teachers actually brought their pets in during the day to get groomed, and then the students would, walk the pets, and they would get some of their training hands-on in that sort of way as well. It was a wonderful arrangement. While I was there also, Westwood High School came up with this idea at the time, was to create another program that would bring students in as another option for choice. So they did not become a magnet school, but they opened up other options within their school, themed. It was like a theme program. And this one was called MOA. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. I know.
I worked on it.
You did. Yes. So Marine and Oceanographic Academy was, it was birthed while I was there at Westwood High School. It wasn't located on our school campus, on the main school campus. It was located off of the school campus, right across the street from Florida Atlantic University. Yeah. And the partnership there was that students would take classes, regular classes, all of their core curriculum, and then when it came to that specific hands-on field, the diving, the lab work, they would walk across the street and utilize the university's
Harbor Branch.
Harbor Branch.
Harbor Branch, not
Harbor
the
Branch,
university.
sorry, got it wrong, Harbor Branch. They would utilize Harbor Branch's campus, whatever they had available. Is incredible, incredible. The options that were available, the academic grade, everything just showed improvement all the way around. The point that I'm kind of making here is, for us to be proactive, why not also, if we're talking later on down the line about opening up more magnet schools, why not also look into the option of you opening up special theme program within our non-magnet schools currently? Even if they serve as a feeder school to a high school, let's say the junior high schools serve as a feeder program into a high school, for example. Maybe there's mechanics. Maybe there's some sort of mechanic program at a middle school that can feed into the auto mechanics program at a high school, or something of that sort. Even STEM programs, why not look into specially themed STEM programs at our non-magnet schools? Something that would be a draw for students who are assigned to their local school, and or if it were magnet, they could be themed magnet schools as well. I know Mr. Fagan and I talked a little bit about that, having a themed magnet school. These are all options that we can, I'm more than happy to discuss, but I'd like us to really discuss it with a goal in mind, because if we're really going to move in that direction, then when we are revising our strategic plan, we have to put that in the strategic plan as well. That this is a long-term goal. We can have short-term goals, but as a long-term goal, this is the movement that we are looking to move into, so that next year's budget will reflect possibly starting at these local areas and then broaden our horizons from there. I think that, you know, if one of the conversations when we opened up the technology,
Treasure Coast Tech.
Treasure Coast Technology School, I don't think that we've talked about it again since. We haven't really harped on the technology piece of opening up that college. So maybe having our middle schools have that approach, you know, where is the technology base? Where is the nursing tech? Where is all the other stuff that I think you all understand where I'm heading? So when we do this, we also need to consider this last point, and the last point is transportation. I don't want us to start thinking about creating these programs that would be wonderful for students, and then tell students in our low-income areas, you can't get there unless you have your own transportation. If we're actually going to create these opportunities for children, we have to provide the transportation to get there, because otherwise we're just going around in this hamster wheel and we're not really going to see any progress. So I don't want us to create these opportunities for a specific demographic. Rather, I'd like us to consider these opportunities for everybody countywide.
Very good point. Thank you.
Were you looking at my notes? I'm just curious.
Are you
We're
cheating
both
down there?
educators,
Yeah.
so I think that we see
I
eye
was,
to eye on
I was
this.
very much a part of.
Two teachers sitting together and
the
one's
MOA
looking off
part.
the other
Yeah,
notes.
so I know how we came about that. Seeing that you brought up St. Lucie, I don't like to bring that up a lot, but I will bring it up in this case. Several years ago, they got together, they had this quandary, and they said, we're losing students to charters and private schools. We need to do a better job. We need to advertise the wonderful programs that we have out there, because we did have the vet program, we did have MOA, we have Embry-Riddle, we have all these amazing programs. So they started to put it on the education channel all the time. They advertised all the time. They had flyers and brochures that went out to parents that were inquiring in the front about which school to choose. There were programs listed for each school. We went, and every principal, I was a principal at one of the points at which we kept going back to this. And at the one point when I was a principal, they said, as a principal, I want you to list anything that is unusual, different, that you offer at your school that makes your school unique. So that's what we started with. We are in competition with our charters and our private schools. So we have to offer the best product that we can. And you mentioned we have school choice. We have limited choice. I'm going to be real honest with you. If a parent isn't happy at their school, sometimes there isn't an option other than to go to charter school because of transportation. So down there, they looked at it, I want to say it's been a long time, 15 years, 14 years ago. They changed their transportation routes. What they did is, a parent, when they go into St. Lucie County Schools and choose which school they want to go to, they have an option of about 7 schools that they can choose that has transportation to each one of those schools. And one of them being a magnet school that's in that zone. They can choose to try to get into the magnet school. But now we started to put in this last year when I helped write that big grant, we put in magnet programs within schools. So what that did is it drew kids from other places, but the kids that were at the school could stay at the school. And we found that was a really great option.
Great idea.
And so we did that with our STEM programs. We brought in those 3 STEM programs at Westwood, at CAST, which is the old Fort Pierce Elementary, and at Sam Gaines. And I was at the Sam Gaines site last year with the grant. And what we did is we had kids coming on a bus, sometimes an hour on a bus to get to our program. And why? Because they wanted that program so badly. So it was a draw for those kids to come. It's costly to do that, but once you do that and get it in place, you can do it. You know, they found out that they could do it for a lot less than they thought they could. And that was because we had school buses that were servicing 3 different elementary schools on the same run. So they would go pick up kids, and then they would drop them off at one school, the next school, and the next school, depending on which school they go to. And as a principal, sometimes you get a kid come off the bus, and a kindergartner especially, that was supposed to go to a different school. So that was kind of fun the first week. So I had brought this up a couple months ago, and I don't know if you remember that conversation, but about looking at our bus routes and providing option for parents, because I think that's the biggest thing parents want is choice. They want to be able to choose what program they put their child in. And if we're offering the best programs and the transportation, we've got the one up on that. As far as the small schools, having been at a small school, the one thing about, yes, it's better for kids. I knew every single kid in my school when I was a principal. I knew every single one of them. I knew their parents. I knew a lot that went on with them. That's an advantage to a small school. The disadvantage was I had to share resources with another school. So I had to share my ESE person. I got her twice a week. So I had to share my resource person that came in. So you do have to share, and we can look at that too. They're not at the school every single day. The principal can't count on them to do lunch duty and do these other things, but you work around it. You figure it out. So that's an option instead of, nobody's saying the elephant in the room, but closing a school. That is an option that we can look at, is how can we share resources? How can we look at changing our bus routes? How can we put magnet programs within schools that are things that parents want? STEM is a huge, I mention STEM all the time because it's a huge one that parents want and kids want. And you can do it in different ways. And I know we have little options of STEM programs going on. Vero Beach Elementary has a wonderful one. Beachland's trying to improve theirs. We have those things going on. Let's tout that from the rooftops. These are the things that we have going on in our schools. And yes, parents, you have a choice of sending your child to that school.
I like it.
Dr. Moxley, this question might be for you because I am not familiar with this idea. How long love the idea of
The
magnet
magnet
school
inside
within the school or a magnet program within a school? Love that idea. For something like that, how long does it take to open a program, not a magnet school, but a program within a school?
I think it depends on the program, and I think depends on the structure of it. Right off the top of my head, it depends on the magnitude of it. But if you were doing an elementary program, I think we could start right now and plan and have something ready to go probably next year. But you have to go, okay, at the ending point, when do you release to parents the applications for their enrollment for the next year? If that's in December, I'm just picking a number, I don't think it is, but let's say, then it might be a push to turn around a program to have it, because you want to, I think we're talking about rebranding.
That's
We're
exactly what it
rebranding
is.
our district, we're rebranding each school within our district, and we're rebranding programs within schools. So you want to have all that lined up and ready to go. So we're at a good point right now because we're at the start of a school year, but you have to think about, when are you going to be advertising, publishing, rolling out the branding of it, the brochures, in enough time that parents have the opportunity to get whatever information before they're filling out the application. So again, I don't know that off the top of my head, but it really depends on when that date is and working backwards. But again, you don't have to do everything all at one time.
Right. So let's say, for example, there might be some schools that have ideas off the top of their head now, and, they gave you a call and said, hey, I have this great idea, I think it's doable. It might be something very simple to start with. If we had volunteers of schools that
Sure.
had something already in place that we could work with, would that be something that could begin almost organically?
Sure.
I think that one of the areas that we are in need as a district is to have a grant writer. We've talked about this before, but this would be a great project for a grant writer to tackle, to get on board with, so that maybe these grants that are out there might, fund some of
Right.
the rebranding of some of these schools. But something that I'm thinking of off the top of my head is VBE Elementary, for example. They have an incredible STEM, I want to say program.
It's a resource
Initiatives.
teacher, yeah.
And he is this one teacher who, they develop these go-karts, like big go-karts, something out of the Little Rascals kind of go-karts. And they actually had them presented at the STEM Fest this past spring. Anyway, something like that that's already kind of in the works might be a good way if we kind of get it out to the schools and say, hey, you have this going on. How would you like to create that idea and just kind of expand it to become a magnet program
Right.
within your school that is already existing? something like that might be a great way for us to kind of begin, maybe, and get a head start on before this new charter school kind of comes in to, because I think that's really like, we're chasing the clock, you know, in essence. Because I think what I hear is that board members are on board with these kind of ideas. But I thought that if there were some schools that, you know, that might actually have these ideas in the works. Even botany, you know, maybe somebody has like this plant garden in their backyard. I mean, I don't know.
Pelican Island has a wonderful environment.
Pelican, right, exactly.
They-
Anyway, I just wanted to,
Miss-
because maybe
okay.
it's not a long
I just want to say,
process.
we need to tap into our people too, to say what ideas do they have and everything else, because I was looking at some of the names that we're going to approve, and one of them was a teacher that was at MOA. There's an outstanding teacher from MOA. And so it's somebody like that you want to really tap into and say, you know, tell us more about that and how we can develop that, something like that.
Well, I mean, look at Mrs. Sleeper, Melissa Sleeper over at Gifford Middle. Amazing,
Yep.
amazing teacher. We are so fortunate to have someone like her and being able to utilize some of her innovation and fund some of her ideas that she has versus her having to keep chasing these grants that I know she does a great job at doing, but I just don't think that's how we maintain. Mrs. Justice had a comment.
Yeah, one of the important things I think we have to remember right now is access and support. So it's wonderful to have these programs, but ensuring that every student has access to the programs is very important. When you're a parent in this district and you serve as a board member, your eyes are open to things sometimes that if you did not have a student in this school district, you may not realize. And one of the things that I've just experienced as a parent of a rising freshman was that she was involved in honors courses with AP Strategies. She had summer assignments. The summer assignments were, to say that they were extensive would be an understatement. It was a full model of the central nervous system. A report about Lord of the Flies and some maps that were pretty intricate that she needed to draw. The nervous system part especially was very interesting. But when I thought about as a board member, how other students might be able to do this assignment over the summer, be supported at home, have the resources to do this assignment. We've looked at this in other areas like science fair. When you go to science fair at some schools, or even when our students will sometimes go to science fair at the district level with the private school coming. Resources, time, parent involvement, all of these things are things that we need to measure. And while I will always have expectations for parents because they've brought a child into this world, and we have expectations for teachers and students, I think it's fair to have expectations for parents. I think that we have to also recognize that we need to set our students up for success. So we're having all these conversations about great programs and increasing access, but we have to really reach students so that we have diversity in our programs and that we ensure every student is successful. Because what I saw as a parent of a freshman going in was the fact that without me, she would have failed. There was absolutely no way. The money we had to invest to get the supplies, the time it took, she had no foundational knowledge to do the program, to do the assignments, and she's got me, and I'm a pretty involved parent. So I just think we have to be reasonable in how we approach this and make sure that we support the students. It's great to have it, but we need to make sure we're supporting every student to be successful in each program.
Any other comment? I would like to go back to the budget. With this part of the conversation of the budget, but there was one item that I wanted to go back to page 26, and I think it was on, I'm just going to go to page 26 right now. And speaking of STEM, I had asked Dr. Moxley and Mr. Fagan to look into why is the science lab material, why did that budget decrease whenever that, as a board, I keep hearing STEM. So, and there were some other schools that the science material budget went down. So if we look at this budget, personally, I had asked, can we give them more money? But I'm only one, so I just wanted to see if anyone else had noticed that.
I have a question about that. So when we discussed buying, we just bought instructional materials for science. That was the last cycle. And lab materials was part of that. And lab materials are expensive because they're, and Mrs. Barrenborn can probably speak to that, they're consumables a lot of the time, right? So you have to replenish.
Materials or equipment? Equipment is
Equipment,
non-consumable.
not, but materials, I'm
Yes.
sorry, materials are consumable. So I don't disagree with you. I mean, Claudia Jimenez used to say, you know, your budget is a reflection of your priorities. So I don't disagree with you. My question would be, is this is on top of instructional material, the science instructional materials that were purchased and supplied to schools, or?
I would have to go back and look at that specific purchase, where those came from, because if they're textbooks, they're coming out of your textbook allocation. If they're, how are we using our media, unless you have the answer to that question. For a past expenditure, I'd have to go back and pull that specific thing to look to see, but,
I just remember Becky Teskey talking about that, the materials, lab materials were.
and consumables are something you budget every year, because it's a recurring thing if you're going to use them every year. The textbooks, that's usually cyclical, like here's what's up for adoption, those kinds of things, but your consumables do end up coming out of textbooks with that.
You know, that line item might also include equipment, we don't know. The other thing is, did their FTE go down at that school?
We looked at that, that
No.
that didn't change, correct?
Don't believe so, no.
No.
Not
And
from
You say
last year to
equipment, you
this
mean
year.
like if they had bought Bunsen burners the year
Right.
past, then they don't need to buy them again?
Exactly.
Okay.
But still, you look at the budget for that, it's not very much at all. So the budget, estimated budget, $914.
To me, it's not enough.
No,
No.
not at all.
Not when you're talking about how many science teachers they have.
Right, well, how many students do they have? Yeah.
Right, but if it's a science teacher trying to use it in their
Right,
classroom, you need to
exactly.
look at the number of classrooms and then figure that out.
And so when I was going through the budget, that stuck out to me, so I started looking at the other schools, and it just seemed like that was a trend across the
It
district.
is.
And that's something I want us to, I personally would like to see us try to give them more money, and if they don't use it, then we know next year.
Can I ask something maybe related to that? Because an area that consistently went up for every school, ranging from $450 to $10,000, $11,000, was school security. We have to do it. There's no question we have to do it. But is the money that we are spending on school security, is that where things are coming out of other school level resources?
I'm wondering if that is when they hire an extra hour for an open house, where they hire an SRO or security. I don't know. I think that is done per school. They get certain monies, and that's why it's different, because at a high school, you're going to have a lot more, different types of things that you're hiring extra security beyond the school day.
Like football games and basketball games,
Yeah, I
they need
specifically
security as
asked him
well.
that question, and that's exactly what I found.
Yeah.
Was like basketball games, football
That's why,
games,
and
yes.
it goes back to that particular school.
Yeah, that's why you see some at middle school and a lot at
And
high school.
elementaries.
Well, a lot of them are
less.
just straight 450, but then it'll jump up to 10,000 and.
Well, I'm sure it jumps up for the high schools in that range, that,
Gifford, well, I noticed it because it goes up at Gifford Middle School.
yeah.
That one, it's nearly 5,000.
They have security. We also use that security firm.
Some schools have additional security, and we don't want to talk about that now, but some schools have additional security, patrols and things.
But that shouldn't be in this
It might
budget,
be
right?
allocated
Wouldn't
to
it
the
be
school
in that,
School security is plain
for
campus
that
security.
night security? That would be over in the general.
It should be, but I don't know if it is.
Right, okay.
I don't know
See, it's
consistently
not-
if that is there.
It's
And
not much-
again, I agree. I think we have to, we can check that as an individual.
Mr. Fagan?
If you look on page 31 as an example, this Dodgertown,
Yeah.
they have $60,000.
That's the additional
That's the on-site
But then like
security person.
at Vero Beach High School,
So,
I'm sorry.
what I'm saying, there's a lot of, you're putting a lot of stuff into a security line, which is what we need to do a better job of breaking out. If he's on-site security, he's something below the line. That's just a gimme.
Right.
But if he's security for the school, for whatever be the reason, he should be something else that the school says
For
either.
a program.
Either we are giving them the money or they're taking it out of discretionary, because if I give you $100,000 for discretionary and you move 10,000 to security, and that fluctuates based upon your activity, you won't necessarily know that. You just know the numbers moving all over the place. You're not knowing how it's funded or why it was funded. We might need to figure out a better way to break out those kind of things so they're more stable. So the 68,000 for the campus security should really be below the line. That's not really at the school level.
Do we remember what the veteran security contract, what was that for? With the dollar amount? Do we,
I'd have to go back and pull
It-
that.
because
it
that was just a
actually-
couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, it increased due to the wages, I guess,
Uh-huh.
but Gifford Middle's up to like 79,000, or I mean Dodgertown, and then Gifford Middle.
I'm sorry, I can't,
And
can you
Sebastian.
speak in the microphone? It's hard to hear you.
The Veterans Council is who we
Right,
contract with.
security company. Mm-hmm,
At Gifford Middle, Dodgertown, and Sebastian High School.
okay,
And their prices did increase this year.
okay.
Yeah.
No
We
school
need to
names.
speak more
But-
generally and
yeah,
maybe in
That
page
is-
numbers rather than
But
names.
here's the thing, with that type of security, it's for night security. It's not for in-school security. We already know we have it.
Okay.
I have a question. It's completely unrelated to this. May I ask it?
Well, I have a question on the related. Do you want to do?
Okay, go ahead.
So with regard to school security, you're right. I think we do need to do a better job in understanding what's what with regard to school security. But something that I've noticed is that most elementary schools have that estimated budget of 450. And then what you just pointed out with Dodgertown is their estimated budget is 68,000. That's incredible. Is that also, is
and
that
what I
what we
would
were
like-
just talking about, that it might be like security cameras and things?
No.
If we could do the security conversation, we have a session coming up that's just dedicated to security. It'll be before you approve this budget.
Okay.
And I would suggest those specific questions should come from that. John,
Yeah.
you may be able to speak to it.
Welcome,
Yeah, 'cause
Mr.
then we have-
Teskey.
Hi, because then we have another one for 60,000.
So, yeah,
Can you hear me?
we can, but I don't know.
Use the one there, thank you.
So, yes, Dr. Moxley's correct. On August 27th, we do have a closed security session meeting with the board once again. So we will update the board on everything that you're talking about. Under the new Senate bill language, we are required to monitor extracurricular activities. So that's a very broad spectrum of activities. That could be before care, after care, weekends, dances, that type of thing. So working with finance, we did allocate $450 to elementary school, $1,000 to our middle schools, and then the high schools vary between $30,000 and $40,000 based upon their events. So we have placed those funds into the school's certain security line to be used for these events. So that is new. So you're asking good questions on that. Certain schools that we don't want to name do have after-hours security, nights and weekends, based upon crime within the area, based upon felonies and burglaries. We can discuss those in depth at that closed session, but that additional large amount of money is not used for SROs. It's used for veterans' security that you have previously approved. And we can go into in-depth with that later on. Does that answer some overarching questions? Okay.
Thank you for stepping in.
Yes.
Yeah, you can change the subject.
Thank you. So also, as a parent, we bought a lot of school supplies. You bought some school supplies. I bought ×4. You bought a lot of school supplies. And one of the things I've seen some chatter on Facebook about is tissues and paper towels and these types of things. So I asked Dr. Moxley, I said, and I've asked this question before, do we supply tissues? Do we supply paper towels? It's my understanding that the principal receives money in their discretionary budget and they buy supplies for their school out of that. So tissues, paper towels, those things come out of their discretionary budget. And I said to Dr. Moxley, I kind of, as a parent, think tissues are important, especially from a sanitary point of view, because, otherwise we got hands and sleeves and all kinds of stuff, right? So tissues and so as a mom, you know, or as is it a reasonable expectation that we're requiring our parents to send in tissues and paper towels, because that was on my list of things to send in on almost every list. So, you know, and do other districts say to schools, high schools, we expect for there to be a functional box of tissues in every classroom at all times? Is that a reasonable expectation? As a parent, it feels like it kind of is, but I don't know.
It varies from district to district, I will tell you that. A school does get a discretionary budget, and out of that discretionary budget, they are to buy their toilet tissue, their paper towels for their bathrooms. If you're doing additional things like science fair projects or things that you're using an extraordinary additional amount, and you want a specific paper towel, then many teachers will put that on a wish list if people are donating things. My past experience, tissues, the commodity, I don't know the right word. We did have a bid for tissues, and there were boxes of tissues that were available. Schools used them at different rates. Yes, some principals bought more tissues than another school would buy tissues. But yes, those were available. We did have a bid for them. I still had school teachers that would put tissues on their list because their school budgets might have been all used up in just tissues. So because of whatever they use them for.
I mean, am I, what do you, I don't know. I just feel like.
Let me chime in?
Yeah, I want to hear
Okay.
from a principal.
All right. So you have a discretionary budget, and you can choose what to do with it. That's why it's called a discretionary budget. If you bought tissues and you bought paper towels for everybody, and let's say you had the flu come into your school, and all of a sudden your discretionary budget is gone on tissues and paper towels, things can be thrown away, versus being able to use that discretionary money for a program or for something else to further your kids' knowledge. I think that when you put it on a list, it's a wish list. You're asking parents, would you be willing to donate this? Not, you have to have it. And it's the same thing with all the supplies. Basically, the state of Florida says we must supply kids with pencils. And so we ask for pencils because we think, you know, we're going to go through a bunch of them, and then it comes out of my discretionary budget. So those are things that we're wishing for and hoping for, and that's why they put them on the list.
So my concern would be as a school board member, and then as a mom and I love my kids' teachers, I don't want them to have to
Right.
buy tissues out of their own pocket, right? And as a mom, I don't mind buying tissues and giving them, but as a school board member, I kind of think like, can we supply tissues? Can we not supply, I mean, we don't supply toilet paper?
Absolutely we do.
But they have to buy toilet paper.
It also walks
Well,
out,
I'm saying-
too.
but it's paid for out of district funds.
I understand
And-
it's paid, but
and-
I don't,
yeah,
the
yeah.
idea that you might have a principal say, do I want to support a program or do I want to have tissues in case the flu hits at my school is a really crummy place to put a principal. That is not, I feel like we're not doing a good job if we're making principals choose between those things. And can we give tissues, I guess is my question.
You can mandate that every classroom will have X number of boxes of tissues, and that must be funded out of their discretionary budget. It has to come out of some budget, okay?
Right.
You can say, this is your level of expectation for a school. Yes, toilet tissue is a non-negotiable. Paper towels are a non-negotiable. But if you want additional paper towels that are different, you want Bounty instead of the ones that go in the containers that are in every restroom, that's a different conversation, that we have to have.
I'm not asking for fancy
So,
tissues,
yeah,
not
yeah.
aloe
Right,
moisturizing
right,
tissues, just a box
right.
of clean.
Mr. Teske.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. I just want to give some background. So when we designate schools to be summer schools, the district funds additional paper towels, hand soap, toilet paper. When schools are designated for shelters for emergencies, we work with finance so they don't have to dip into their supply of discretionary. Now, Ms. Berenborg is correct. As of right now, discretionary, that ordering is left up to the principal and the administrative assistant. They will budget how many paper towels, how much soap they will need, and toilet paper. We, in the physical plan, have streamlined the supplies with vendors. So we worked on that last year to make sure one school's not paying more than the other school. So we haven't taken the control away from them of being able to purchase it and win, but we have streamlined the vendors for expenses. Now, our previous workshop, we had in June the custodial allocation presentation. One of those phases was us, the physical plant, taking the ordering away from them, so it would be out of their discretionary. We would do that for them. So Mrs. Reben would do that for each school, working with the custodian. That was one part of the presentation, to take the ordering off, to make sure it was streamlined, to make sure it was cost effective. We buy it in bulk, it's cheaper, we know they're supplied, we keep a stockpile of it at our warehouse, we deliver it to them. So that's something in the future that we will meet with Dr. Moxley on, and then if she wants us to bring it back, we will. But the discretionary, as a former principal as well, you have to forecast your enrollment. You have to forecast flu season. You have to look at those times of the year when you're going to run low. And otherwise, you're doing emergency orders, which cost shipping, and there we go. So we are here to assist and help.
So I do have a comment about that, and I haven't quite gotten to this topic, so I apologize to Mr. Teskey. I've dealt with some other topics. But this particular topic on tissues, toilet paper, that kind of thing, if we do a district-wide distribution of that, and we're not going to ask the schools to buy that, then remember their budgets will have to be reduced, because it's not like you can keep this amount of money over here, and we've got another budget over here that's now going to pick up that expense. So, I mean, the money needs to follow what you're paying for. So that's one comment. The second comment is, there's nothing preventing us right now from doing bulk purchases of toilet paper, paper towels, tissues, so that, and we warehouse it, so we get that economy of scale. And we say to our schools, you have discretionary budget, but you're not going to go buy it from Sam's Club. You're not going to go buy it from this vendor or this. You're going to buy it through the district vendor warehouse that we use, because you're going to get that bulk pricing. So therefore, they're using their discretion. There's nothing stopping us from doing that right now.
Good. I just, and I know I'm making light of it. It's just, I hear about teachers having to spend their own money to fund their classrooms and supply their classrooms, and that's obviously not what we want as a board. We've had discussions about that before. So just being sensitive to that. I know it sounds silly, tissues, but
I will say also that when LEAD money started coming, that helped a lot with funding classrooms. I'm not sure what it's up to now. I remember last time I got it was 250.
I think it's still too.
Is it 250? And so they get that check at the beginning of the year, and they can spend it how they want. So it's like a discretionary fund for a teacher, but it must be spent on the students that year in their classroom by November. But you can submit receipts from last January. So you could buy over the summer and do all these things that you're buying for your classroom. So when they say, I'm buying all this stuff for my classroom, yes, but they can be reimbursed $250.
Up to. Mrs. Rosario, then Mrs., or then Dr. Schiff, and then let's,
I want to kind of wrap my head around principals. I kind of look at a school building as a house, and the budget that happens in your house includes some of these areas, such as toilet paper and paper towels and tissues. Some schools, they do not use as much sometimes as others. And so that's just, you mentioned this, Dr. Moxley, and then I raised my hand before to make comment, and then you already touched on it. But some schools may have enough paper towels, and as you mentioned, they might want to use that money for something else. I don't know if we can survey the principals on that just to get the buy-in and get their feedback as to whether they think it's a great idea or not, but that's just, you may not even
A
have
great
to.
idea of, I'm sorry, I'm not tracking on the
Of,
same.
having a certain amount of their discretionary funds pooled into this district purchase in bulk.
Okay.
So that, as opposed to them being able to order it themselves.
My suggestion would be is that we determine the vendor, and I think we already have. We know, okay, we
Yeah.
have this vendor, we buy it for this rate, we've got the bulk pricing. We just say, on these 3 items, you must buy from the warehouse. You don't have the option of going. You're still got
Yeah.
your discretionary money, you're still paying for it, but we've got a better deal for you.
Okay.
And you're gonna, I think that's step 1. And then we would be able to have an understanding or a feel from the data, how much is everybody spending on each of those items, because we would have a district,
Yeah.
we'd be able to track that a
I
little
think the
better.
bigger discussion here was, we started on lab materials. Science lab materials, which
Right.
are way more important to discuss. I mean,
Then toilet paper?
Toilet paper and tissue
no,
are very important.
not at all. I think that they are equally important, but you know, in its own function, science, the lack of science materials and the lack of science consumables for schools is critically important for us to address. So I'd just prefer to not take away from toilet paper and paper towels, but to ensure somehow or another that schools have, all of the elementary schools have equal amount of science lab materials, and all of the junior high schools the same in the high schools. I mean, it's just, I think that it's something that we have to ensure equitably across the board.
And you do have an item, and I think Mrs. Zork brought that up. I think what has been problematic for me in wrapping my arms around this is we're constantly looking at actual expenditures to a budget, when in essence, you really need to look expenditure, budget to budget. And like the one we looked at with Gifford Middle, you know, in 17-18, they had $811 of expenditures. Then the 18-19, they were $2,300. And now they're back budgeted for. I think the concern is with what are we budgeting for them? And what is the equitable? And I'm using equitable versus equal, because if you have a school that is going to have a STEM focus or a STEAM focus, their equitable distribution may be a little different than equal parts. So I think that's part of the discussion here.
Well, and then my other question would be, are we sure exactly what we're looking at?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, because I mean,
Yeah.
there's something being said that we're not funding it properly. We probably aren't. I'm not going to disagree. I think we have underfunded in that area in general. I think we probably have. But I'd like to be clear about exactly where that is, because I would imagine there are probably some materials and different things hidden in other areas that we're paying for it in different ways.
Sure. And so I think I hear from the board, or whether you want consensus on that, you want us to look, because I have talked to Mrs. Ork, she has said it at the table, some of the rest of you have, about the science lab materials, that may not be enough for our schools in looking at that as a pretty high priority.
Just to piggyback off of what you just mentioned, Dr. Moxley, looking at what are actual expenditures versus estimated budget. Mr. Fagan mentioned this earlier on in the presentation, that in our September budget book, the look of this chart is going to be different, because we're actually going to be able to look at, for example, fall expenditures from last year and fall expenditure year before and fall expenditures last year. And that's how we'll look at apples to apples, rather than now looking at apples to oranges. Is that okay?
Okay, any other questions, comments on the budget right now? Do you?
Just to reiterate that because we're on the topic of classroom expenditures, that all of those right now are not in school budgets. Those are all in district budgets, which will then be allocated to schools when we get the next update on the 28th. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And not to get off the subject, but when I go back and I think about, being more efficient in how we're buying our bathroom products, I'm hoping that we're efficient when we're buying for things like our copy paper.
Yeah.
We're not just, one school isn't going to Staples and buying a bulk from Staples, and because I know we have an account with them, that's why I say Staples, is that we have a warehouse and that we have more buying power with items like that. Are we doing that with certain items that we know we use a lot of?
So I can, I can speak on the areas I oversee. Let's say food service. So you approve MacArthur Milk, Erneston Produce, those big items that go to each cafeterias, those are streamlined. But the principal can purchase from Staples, they can purchase from
Amazon.
Office Max,
See,
you
we
can.
gotta get that more efficient.
They have the ability to do that within their discretionary. They contract with their copy machines, they contract with whoever they have used before, and they shop around for rates.
We used to, because I know I was an assistant principal in the district, we used to have in the warehouse like construction paper and copy paper, and we could order directly from the warehouse.
So we have ordered in the past in bulk, and they can, just like the print shop, you can order from the print shop, or you can choose not to order from the print shop. It's principal's
But we
discretion.
do have construction paper and copy paper and stuff like that?
That would be,
I think,
Purchasing.
I think this is something we need to go, because
Yeah.
Mr. Fagan and I are so new
This would be
that I
interesting
don't know
to
the
look
answer to
into.
that. But I will tell you from past experience, where I have been exposed to the structure where the warehouse had everything, pencils,
Yes.
markers, everything, everybody, whatever. And you have to weigh the overhead, the staff to get it bundled up, fill the orders, those kinds of things. That sometimes there are some items that it is more cost-effective to go to Staples
Okay.
and Office Depot and things like that. And so you really have to find that sweet spot there. Copy paper, the square footage, there's a cost of storing that. How long is the shelf life on it? How, all of that. So there are things like your bathroom products, those usually are more cost efficient to have those in-house in your warehouse. Pencils, pens, those kinds of things because of the shelf life. And we found not so much. I don't remember construction paper enough, but I know crayons, those kinds of things. It was really more, you could get the economy of scale better at Staples and those kinds of things, especially if you get a bid for them and you're selling. So the key is really to find what are the items that you can get the best bid for, and then don't pay the overhead of the warehouse for those items. Get the bid right.
That makes sense, yeah.
For that.
All right.
Okay, I'm just bringing closure. I think we have some additional feedback. We know the structure of the booklet needs to be, we think, user-friendly a little bit better. You brought up some great discussions. I think, a lot of the discussions were philosophical about size of school. We do have some great neighborhood schools. That is great to have that. I think it's about how do you want to use your resources, make sure everybody knows how you're using your resources and the best bang that they are getting from that. And if that philosophically is a small school, then we need to tout that. If there's other ways of getting at that, then I think those are discussions that will come later on, and I will set that as part of the strategic plan.
Okay. All right. I'm just reading from the agenda here, but it's not that I'm encouraging it. Board committee reports? Okay.
So I'm just going to report for MPO. At our last meeting on July 10th, we went over the draft community characteristics report. It was very interesting. I've enjoyed my time on MPO. Really neat. Learning a lot about our community and planning in general. So we've had nearly 30,000 new residents between 2000 and 2015 in Indian River County, and we're growing older. Probably not shocking to everyone. The median age in Indian River County was 46.9 years of age in 2000, and now it's 50.7 years of age in 2015. The biggest increase we've seen is in our Hispanic population, which went from 6.5% in 2000 to 12% in 2015. And the highest growth has been in North County and South County, with Fellsmere, VLE, Sebastian seeing growth, and Vero Beach Southwest, Oslo Highlands seeing growth. An interesting point and something that we discussed in MPO was the percentage of people in the community that currently don't have a vehicle, and it's about 6% of people of driving age that do not have a vehicle. That was interesting. I think I asked for the average statewide, and they didn't have that. But for planning purposes and as a school district, we look at, I think when I think about why we go to MPO and why it's important for Mr. Teskey to be on the community committee and for me to sit as a school board member, they have conversations about things like the railroad and transportation, and we have Gifford Middle School, which we've talked about is very close to the railroad. And so when they make plans and we know, when we forecast, that's something we're gonna have to consider as a school district safety, and we should be a part of those conversations. The other thing is Go Line stops. The more access that we can provide for our high school students, for families picking up students, especially for our technical center, when they plan Go Line stops for dual enrollment students, if they need to go out to the community Indian River State College, there's a stop that is being planned there, and that's been a long time coming. So just part of why we sit on MPO, I encourage any board members who'd like to come and sit in on meeting, they have room where you can sit off to the side and listen. And I don't know that I offer a lot right now as a board member sitting on that committee, but it's nice to be a part of those conversations and to learn. And I encourage board members, if you have any questions that you'd like me to bring back to MPO or concerns, to please reach out to me, and I will make sure to ask those questions and then bring you an answer back.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, ma'am.
No?
Yes, I attended the Fellsmere Planning and Zoning meeting last week. Of course, our hot topics were a new boat ramp that's going in, what to do about trailers when they come in, and porta-johns, ironically. But I also know that there are lots of projects being planned for the future for land development and possible homes up there. And if you talk about Fellsmere Farms or things like that, I think we need to keep our eye on that, because I think we're looking at it, when it explodes, it's going to explode. So I don't know when that land's going to be developed, but I think that they're starting to look at infrastructure for that. So we need to just keep our eye on that.
Okay. Vero Beach Planning and Zoning is the one that I was appointed to. Not really anything there to report, but I have been watching what's going to happen with the pool at Leisure Square, because that will affect what happens with our swim students over at Vero Beach High School. So I'll keep you up to date on that if you're not following it. So that's all I have.
Mrs. Rick, I'd just like to say, I also sit on Indian River Shores Planning and Zoning. I do not regularly attend the meetings because there are very few things that ever concern us. We do not have any schools in Indian River Shores, and I do look at the agenda is sent to me, and I am in contact with the staff there. Normally, it's a tree being removed or something of that nature, and it doesn't necessarily affect our students. So I just wanted to make that note. If someone has a concern in Indian River Shores and you'd like me to bring it forward, I can do that, but in general, it's a little bit separate.
Yeah, and likewise, if I can add, with Sebastian, I've been following it, but often it's somebody's adding a garage and it doesn't affect us, or they've been canceling the meeting for lack of items. So occasionally there have been items, but there hasn't been stuff that concerned us, or I've been out of town. So I haven't forgotten it. It's just, it's
Right.
been not relevant.
Right.
I wanted to make a point about the swimming pool, because I know that's going to probably be a controversial subject for us to talk about. Think about it this way, what the cost is to maintain that pool if we were to do something like that. And the other thing is, consider all the different clubs and things that don't have facilities that go out to ones. I can give you one. I was a coach for the golf team, and we're certainly not in the business of building a golf course, but we use golf courses in the area. And I think, sometimes those clubs have to go use facilities that are outside. So I don't want to talk about the fact that we are or we're not going to get into the business of building a swimming pool, but I also think that you need to consider all those things as well.
Well, one thing that was brought up at through the meeting was that the high school students do utilize the pool, but it's a courtesy, because we wouldn't want to have to build a pool. Is there something that we should be looking at as a district to help?
Sure. Gifford,
help?
we have a nice pool there, right?
Well, they said it's not regulation.
It's not
It's not
Olympic regulation?
It's not, doesn't
not.
follow the
The
regulations.
one that's regulation is Sebastian.
Ah.
And we already bus kids for the track.
Yes, so. Okay, Dr. Moxley, your item.
I don't have anything for that item.
You don't.
No, I do not.
Mrs. Diagrasta?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. We're good?
I think we're good.
All right. So we're going to adjourn this meeting at 2:46.